Xena's the show I always wish Wonder Woman was. Xena's the show I always wished Charlie's Angels was. Xena has no apologies. It's a really cool show. It's got cool characters, and then the action in it is a lot of fun. The scripts are really good. The backstory of Xena's character is quite magnificent. There's a lot there to be had with the fact that she was an Attila the Hun kind of killer and pillager. Years past, Xena turns over this new leaf, but she's haunted by her evil deeds. And they were truly evil. Untold numbers of dead during her reign. Now she's fighting for redemption, but she knows she doesn't deserve redemption. The only thing she can do is just do good now, on a day-to-day basis. But she doesn't deserve mercy. She's paying a debt she can never repay, and she's always going to pay 10 cents on the dollar. That's good shit.
So, my favorite television show has always been Xena Warrior Princess. Xena had started out in 1995 as the poorer sister show to Hercules: The Legendary Journeys, which hosted the character's brief but memorable debut appearance in a trilogy of episodes entitled The Warrior Princess, The Gauntlet, and Unchained Heart. A villain turned ally, Xena was rescued from the footnotes of television history when the dailies for her first episode came in, and the sight of her in action triggered studio executives to call for a spin-off series. And so Xena Warrior Princess debuted later that same year, with absolute beans for a budget, relying heavily on freelance writers, and with little faith from the executives. The head of studio at the time was firmly of the belief that Hercules was the real star property. Female heroes, he told producer Rob Tappert, were not successful in television. Yet Xena would be beating Hercules in viewership by the end of its first year, and would go on to battle for the #1 spot in the Nielsen ratings as the most popular syndicated drama both in America and internationally, occasionally beating out, among other things, Baywatch. By the end of its run, it had swept up numerous awards for both soundtrack and costume design, including multiple New Zealand Television Awards and Emmy nominations. Filmed in New Zealand with both an American and a Kiwi cast and crew, the show aired for 6 years under executive producers Rob Tappert, Sam Raimi, and R.J. Stewart. It featured 2 protagonists, a reformed ex-murderous warlord and her young innocent sidekick, as they went up against Greek gods, mythical monsters, and the warlord of the week. And this show had everything. Ass-kicking, gay rights, Nyla Dixon's costumes, Helen of Troy, Bruce Campbell, comedy, Norse gods, a bomb-ass soundtrack, heartbreak, Lord Celeborn as an ethnically ambiguous warlord, a Footloose episode, Homelander is the future King David of Israel, betrayal, Gina Torres as Cleopatra, Jesus, kind of, Carl Urban playing like 5 different characters, Lao Tzu's boss-ass wife, trans rights, 90s special effects, Xena teaching Hippocrates how to be a doctor, Excalibur, censored episodes that may or may not have aged well, we'll talk about it, beauty pageants, lesbian vampires, Haldir of Lothlorien in a turban, musical episodes, time-traveling archaeologist reincarnations, doppelgangers. The show was breaking the fourth wall before it was cool. Historical accuracy, we don't know her and we don't care to. Xena ran so that the crowd chanting "We will rock you" in A Knight's Tale could walk. Anyway, the eponymous hero was played by Kiwi actress Lucy Lawless, who made her debut in 1989 on the New Zealand sketch comedy show Funny Business, and since the end of Xena has gone on to recurring roles in, among other things, Battlestar Galactica, Spartacus, Parks and Recreation, Ash vs. Evil Dead, and most recently, My Life is Murder, plus cameos in Sam Raimi's Spider-Man,
Guy with 8 hands. Sounds hot.
And a particularly memorable episode of The Simpsons.
Wait a minute, Xena can't fly.
I told you, I'm not Xena. I'm Lucy Lawless.
Oh.
She was also in Eurotrip.
Bring on the Flugelham
There are a lot of behind-the-scenes factors that account for Xena's success, but a lead actor can make or break a show, and Lawless, the last-minute replacement for British actress Vanessa Angel, who dropped out of the project due to illness, was a fucking powerhouse from note one.
They scouted around a lot of actresses in Los Angeles, but because it was pilot season, they were like, we're not leaving LA during pilot season.
In the end, they just grabbed a local actor who had appeared briefly in a recent episode of Hercules, dyed her hair black, and put her back on set.
Yeah, they were worried. They were like, oh, you can't use her. You just used her as Lila in the Centaur episode. Here's a list of 5 other actresses, and they all turned it down. Thank you.
In Lucy Lawless's own words, she was the lucky local kid who got the gig. And in her hands, the character immediately became iconic. Nearly 6 feet tall, with broad shoulders, a deep voice, a first-rate murder glare, and some absolutely fucking feral fight scene energy. Her portrayal allowed the show to soar out from under Hercules' shadow and into groundbreaking and bar-setting campy action hero legend. The show's secondary protagonist was a peasant runaway and aspiring bard named Gabrielle. Sidekick, moral compass, comic relief, and eventual love interest, Gabrielle was played with warmth, charm, and wonderful comedic timing by American actress Renee O'Connor. And rounding out some but not all of the extensive recurring cast were also Bruce Campbell, Ted Raimi, Hudson Leak, Carl Urban, Daniel Cormack, and the late, great Kevin Todd Smith. The show also helped prep the New Zealand industry for the juggernaut that would be The Lord of the Rings, with Richard Taylor, Tanya Roger, and Nyla Dixon all working on Xena before going on to receive Academy Awards for LOTR. Dozens of cast members and stunt crew featured in both productions. Sam Raimi went on to direct some of the most successful superhero movies of all time with Spider-Man.
These are quite classic Xena days.
Xena's main stuntwoman, Zoe Bell, would go on to double Uma Thurman on Kill Bill and earn a place as one of Hollywood's most iconic stunt workers, while riding double Dana Grant would work on Wonder Woman and Mad Max Fury Road and eventually start her own stunt school. A cult favorite among fans from every walk of life, Xena Warrior Princess is still upheld today as one of the best shows for women in television history. If you enjoy The Witcher on Netflix and want a gender swap where Geralt actually treats Ysgir with respect, or you're really into hyper-competent chaotic evil, but you also really love a redemption arc, or liked the battle scenes in Wonder Woman but thought you'd prefer a character with more grit who had committed multiple war crimes.
Or you think Our Flag Means Death was pretty perfect, but you wish there was a version of it that was about women in ancient Greece instead of male pirates.
Or you love characters like Arya and Brienne on Game of Thrones but want more sapphics, zero rape, and a much worse budget, Xena is the show for you. Disclaimer, this is just a subjective video essay about the best television show of all time. Also, spoilers. So, this is the deep dive that no one asked for.
I'm looking for my best friend. Maybe you've seen her? 6 feet tall, dark hair, lots of leather. She fights like the Harpies in a bad mood.
So, Xena the Warrior Princess is born in Amphipolis in northern Greece, to an innkeep mother and a father of mysterious origins. As the story goes, when a local warlord attacks her village, the teenage Xena encourages her peers to fight back rather than surrender, and her younger brother Lysias dies, as do many other men from their town, leaving her first in line to bear the blame. Alienated from her own people, she decides they need a standing army as protection from further attack. Then she takes the surrounding towns as a buffer. Then she begins raiding along the Thracian coast. 10 years down the line, with multiple bitter betrayals, a secret child, crippling injury, and a lot of death under her belt, Xena is a rampaging psychopath who mostly refuses to kill civilian women and children, but definitely kills everybody else. And then, and here we catch up to the trilogy of episodes that were her first television appearance, still in fledgling form, as an antagonist on the show Hercules, she plots to kill the son of Zeus. He turns out to be a little out of even her league, And she fails, finds herself in a moral quandary over the life of an innocent, loses her army, and finally turns her back on the evil deeds of her past. Important to note here that Xena was initially meant to die after the completion of her 3-episode arc, but her character was so goddamn good that they yoinked her from the storyline and gave her a self-titled show instead. At the start of Xena Warrior Princess, our former villain is ready to give up violence and perhaps her life altogether when she sees a group of villagers being captured by slavers and decides to rescue them. This is how she meets her soon-to-be best friend Gabrielle, and they wander the land together, defeating evil and helping the innocent, all the while Xena is aware that nothing she ever does will fully balance the scales of redemption.
It's a relatively new thing, but times are changing on television with Xena and and some of the and Lucy Lawless, and I mean she's actually carved a whole new chapter in stunt work for women. That's a very positive thing.
So Xena Warrior Princess is in many ways an action show before anything else. A part of Universal's action block, it was heavily influenced by Hong Kong martial arts and wuxia films, particularly Bridget Lin's Bride with the White Hair, a film from 1993 about an orphan turned warrior on the path of bloody revenge. And the place of importance that both the character of Xena and her show hold in the history of fighting women on screen is legitimately hard to exaggerate. To quote an Entertainment Weekly article from the year 2000, published upon news of the show's coming cancellation, the warrior princess was always allowed to be mean, not steal your boyfriend or diss your outfit mean, which had been the usual lot of the TV tough girl, but mess with me and I'll crush your skull mean. They're not wrong, and the show wasn't just groundbreaking because it featured an actress in armor.
They're 20 years apart, much more progressive in terms of what you can get away with doing. If Wonder Woman were made today, I think it could go to some, less restricted places.
While the number of female-led action franchises have always dragged significantly behind film and television viewership demographics, according to audience gender surveys, movie makers and showrunners have been handing weapons to the occasional scantily clad actress for ages. And this is where we're going to talk about not Xena for a second. It was Dr. Caroline Heldman who popularized the term fighting fucktoy, which she uses to refer to hypersexualized characters that may seem empowered but whose agency has been entirely stripped for the sake of making them into a sex object instead of a complex subject. Comic writer Kelly Sue DeConnick similarly coined the sexy lamp test, namely the idea that if you can remove a character, no matter how badass, from your piece of media and replace them with a sexy lamp without this having any effect on the plot, then your character has no real agency. And admittedly, some small part of that fighting fucktoy trope may be a characteristic of the action industry in general. Rambo doesn't exactly market itself on three-dimensional emotional complexity, and Hollywood has frequently pressed ludicrous and unhealthy expectations of fitness onto its male action stars. But Schwarzenegger, Stallone, Bruce Willis, Chuck Norris, Jackie Chan, today's plethora of superheroes, these legends of the Western screen rose to fame through their ability to sell their action scenes, not their ability to look good in heels and a bra while occasionally waving around a sword. Today, the pantheon of successful female action heroes who have been allowed to get dirty, look ugly, and wear utilitarian gear, who display both a complexity of character and the ability to throw a convincing punch, is always growing, but that growth is slow. Flashback to the year 1964. The film starring Sean Connery would be the first major blockbuster of the franchise. The poster featured a naked woman in repose. The tagline was, "James Bond is back in action. Everything he touches turns to excitement." Based on Ian Fleming's novel of the same name, Goldfinger launched a public craze for the franchise, and it had some of the most iconic and enduring elements of Bond. Odd Job's chakram hat, the line, "No, Mr. Bond, I expect you to die," and the Bond girl whose name just barely scraped past American censorship, Pussy Galore. These days, if you're talking about complex, well-written characters in film, Pussy Galore isn't necessarily the first to come to mind. The titular villain's right-hand woman turned reluctant hero and love interest, Pussy Galore was played by Honor Blackman, formerly of the British secret agent show The Avengers. And on one hand, well...
Dink, say goodbye to Felix. Man talk.
Femme fatales with few layers, both in personality and in clothing, are a dime a dozen in Bond films, but Honor Blackman had learned basic judo for The Avengers, in a studio full of practitioners who had never taught a woman before. After a childhood using what she called her terribly good uppercut to protect her brother from bullies, Blackman spent 2 seasons of the show executing judo throws on concrete floors before giving up the reins to Diana Rigg. When she went on to Goldfinger, her judo coaches went with her, and fans at the time remembered her as tough and intelligent, one of the first actresses to ever portray any form of martial art on the Western screen. She had brought Bond to his knees, and this was shocking at the time, however briefly. The next year, she published Honor Blackman's Book of Self-Defense, and while most of the techniques aren't workable in any sort of day-to-day circumstance, and the picture demonstrations all feature the author in high heels and tight dresses, it was still an absolute rarity on bookstore shelves at the time. An article in Life magazine in 1966 said that Blackman was encouraging, quote, pretty young things to take up judo, promised readers that she wasn't a man-hater, and assured them that Blackman only did her judo training before appointments with her hairdresser. It would take 10 years to establish the first proper action woman on film, though, with the rise of Pam Grier in blaxploitation films like 1974's massively influential Foxy Brown.
To this day, my favorite of all the blaxploitation movies is Coffee. All right, with Pam Grier.
To quote Grier, the 1970s was a time of freedom and women saying that they needed empowerment. There was more empowerment and self-discovery than any other decade I remember. All across the country, a lot of women were Foxy Brown. They were independent, fighting to save their families, not accepting rape or being victimized. This was going on all across the country. I just happened to do it on film. And if there's an ocean of change between Pussy Galore and Foxy Brown, there is a world between any Bond girl and Ellen Ripley, who first debuted in 1979's Alien. In the years between Ripley's first appearance and her return for the equally iconic sequel in 1984, Xena bombed in theaters and swept the Razzie nominations. Red Sonja was released shortly after to equally terrible result. Neither of them favorable entries in the short, shaky list of notable film heroes. A new icon wouldn't arrive until 1991 with the release of Terminator 2 Judgment Day, which propelled the gun-wielding, chain-smoking Sarah Connor to legendary status. And this is about where the list maxes out. In fact, in Hollywood, it seemed that between the mid-70s and early 90s, Pam Grier, Sigourney Weaver, and Linda Hamilton were not only at the top of the female action pack, but almost made up its entirety. According to this 2016 research paper entitled The De-Evolution of Female Protagonists in Action Cinema, 1960 to 2014, there were 255 American action films in the 1980s. 91.8% of them had male leading characters. Meanwhile, some of the biggest blockbusters of the 80s had been Indiana Jones, Star Wars, Ghostbusters, Top Gun, Batman, Rocky, Rambo, fucking Beverly Hills Cop. It was the decade of Lethal Weapon and RoboCop, of Jean-Claude Van Damme and Chuck Norris. And yet by 1995, when Xena first aired, the list of American female action heroes who were actually any good was still painfully short. The Long Kiss Goodnight wouldn't debut for another year, The Matrix for another 4, Kill Bill for 8. In Eastern cinema, the story was a little bit different.
In Hong Kong, you had Mao Yang, known in America as Angela Mao. You know, and she just spends the entire movie just kicking ass, pissed off. All right, and you buy it.
Heroines had been appearing in action films for decades already, from early wuxia films of the 60s to the kung fu craze of the 70s, the stunt-heavy films of the 80s, and the Hong Kong action cinema of the 90s, which influenced Hollywood filmmakers like Quentin Tarantino and shaped much of the fighting styles seen on Xena. As an example, by 1992, Malaysian dancer turned actor Michelle Yeoh had already cemented herself in legend on Super Cop, where an all-out stunt war with Jackie Chan led to her jumping a motorcycle onto the top of a moving train without a wire. After the success of Jackie Chan's Rumble in the Bronx in 95, Super Cop finally saw a wide American release in 96. The next year, Michelle Yeoh would appear as a Bond girl in Tomorrow Never Dies, her mainstream introduction to a Western audience. Now, over 20 years later, she has been in some of the biggest action movies to hit American screens, and with Everything Everywhere All at Once releasing in 2022, maybe also one of the best films in recent memory. And yet for actresses in America, to quote Star Trek's Jeri Ryan in 1999, if you'll notice, the film industry hasn't exactly capitalized on the success of action women. There was Sigourney Weaver and Linda Hamilton, and, well, that's about it.
The research shows that in G, PG, and PG-13 films, the ratio of male to female characters is wildly imbalanced. For every one female character, there are 3 male characters. This is speaking characters. If you look at crowd scenes, only 17% of the characters are female.
So what about television of the day? In Gender and Women's Leadership, a reference handbook, Natalie Green neatly graphs Nielsen rankings of the top 10 broadcast television programs on the 4 biggest channels for American network television. In the 1950s, excluding repeats, only 3 of those shows, a whopping 6%, weren't led by men, and more than half the women on television were portraying housewives.
The first real female action hero of a TV series, all right, was a TV show called Honey West. All right, and it was on for like a little bit and it was canceled. And the reason it was canceled is because she was too strong.
In the 1960s, the number rose to 14%, and then in the 1970s to 24.5%. Yet in 73, the year of Roe v. Wade, in an article for TV Guide, Leonard Gross reported that network executives were struggling to see the appeal in expanding those roles on screen, with a CBS official reportedly asking, and I quote, "Who wants to see a primetime series about a woman?" The same year, author Betty Miles, who penned Channeling Children, Sex Stereotyping in Primetime TV, ran a small study of the 16 top-rated evening broadcast programs at the time. According to her findings, men in action-adventure programming outnumbered women by 6 to 1. Furthermore, fewer men displayed what she called incompetent or bungling behavior. The Bionic Woman was a rare superhero show which featured as its lead Jamie Summers, a character of immense physical strength who often used that strength, as opposed to her sexuality, a more common feature of Charlie's Angels, to achieve her ends. In both cases, they generally received their orders from higher-ranking men, but like the police duo Cagney and Lacey a decade later, they were notable heroes of the small screen. In 1982, the National Commission on Working Women sponsored its first What's Wrong with This Picture report, where it discovered that out of television's top-ranked 25 shows and 25 newly introduced series, men still made up roughly 2/3 of all on-screen characters. Unsurprisingly, nearly all of these were also young and white. Fast forward nearly a decade, when according to an article published by the New York Times, the same study now looked at 555 characters on 80 network shows for the 1989 to 1990 season. On screen, women now made up 43% of all roles, the closest it's ever come to half on network television. And, quoting the same study, despite some exceptions, the study says, women are still often depicted on television as half-clad and half-witted, and needing to be rescued by quick-thinking, fully clothed men. There also were apparently more aliens, as in actual extraterrestrials, on network TV than Asians, Native Americans, and Latin Americans combined. By the early 2000s, lovers of genre content had Firefly, Battlestar Galactica, Farscape, but even here, plenty of these characters were technically playing second fiddle to a lead actor. And the statistics are even worse behind the camera. Even on Xena, only a handful of episodes per season were usually written by a woman, and only 5 episodes were ever directed by one. So what about your characters in positions of power on screen? Just as Xena was kicking into production in mid-1995, Kay Koplovitz, CEO of USA Networks, was quoted as saying that female characters who were too strong could be intimidating, off-putting, and overbearing to men and women. So let's examine that a little. We're only talking about television here, but what television presents as social or political standard often influences attitudes in real life. Children and adults are both taught and impacted by on-screen behavior, and the easiest example of this is usually the Jaws effect. Coined by Dr. Christopher Neff at the University of Sydney, the Jaws effect refers to the film's massive and highly detrimental impact on how the general public viewed the shark species. It directly influenced an upkick in large-scale hunting, government-sponsored shark culling programs, and the impeding of shark conservation efforts. So when we look at the visibility statistics both on-screen and behind the camera in America, we are to some degree examining the social mindset of that era. In 1965, women only made up 2% of the US Senate, and by the time Xena aired in 95, the number had come to a then all-time high of 9%. Opportunities for actors of all kinds have advanced decade by decade, but this has happened slowly, in fits and starts, often through periods of progression followed by conservative groundswell. When the original Star Trek series premiered in 1966, its main message was a hopeful one, that the world of the Starship Enterprise and its crew had evolved past prejudicial cultural barriers, representing a brighter, more hopeful tomorrow. Among the crew was Starfleet officer Nyota Uhura, played by the late, great Nichelle Nichols. Uhura wasn't an action hero, and she wasn't first billed on the show, but she was a technician and an officer. She spoke multiple languages, worked on the bridge of the Enterprise, and in 1968, she was also one half of what is commonly referred to as the first interracial kiss on American television.
All of us little girls that were sitting out there, regardless of what our origin was, realized that you were representing the future of women, not just the future of black women, because of course we were thrilled to find out we were in the future. But the future of women. Yes. That we could look good, knock everybody's socks off, and do our job better than anybody else. And so thanks for the uplift.
Surprisingly, Nichelle Nichols had actually planned to leave the show earlier than this. Star Trek was not a ratings darling, and far less of a utopia behind the scenes than viewers might have suspected. She had to deal with her lines being regularly cut from the script, as well as prejudice both off the set and from Star Trek executives. She had been offered other work on Broadway, and was set on taking it. Yet in 1967, at an NAACP function, she was introduced to a man who called himself her biggest fan, and had apparently been intent on meeting her in particular. The man was Martin Luther King Jr., of course, only a short handful of years past the March on Washington and the marches in Selma, Alabama for voting rights. Nichols' immediate comment was, "I wish I could be out there marching with you." And allegedly, Dr. King's response was, "You are marching. You are reflecting what we are fighting for."
And then this man says, "Yes, Miss Nichols, I am that fan. I am your best fan, your greatest fan. And my family are your greatest fans. As a matter of fact, this is the only show on television that my wife, Coretta, and I will allow our little children to watch, to stay up and watch." I said, "Well, I'm leaving Star Trek." He said, "You cannot. You cannot." And I felt like that little boy Willis. "What you talking about, Dr. King?" But you know I didn't say that, no. But I was taken aback, and I didn't say anything. I just looked at him. He said, "Don't you understand what this man has achieved? For the first time on television, we will be seen as we should be seen every day, as intelligent, quality, beautiful people who can sing, dance, but who can go into space, who can be lawyers, who can be teachers, who can be professors, who are in this day, and yet you don't see it on television until now. If you leave, that door can be closed because you see, your role is not a black role, and it's not a female role." And I remember being angry. Why me? Whatever happened come Monday morning, I went to Jean, and I'm not sure to this day if I knew what I was going to say.
Nichols stayed on the show for another 2 seasons, and in 1977, she officially partnered with NASA on a recruitment drive for the Space Shuttle program. Among these applicants were Sally Ride, the first American woman in space, and Guy Bluford, the first African American in space. She was also inspiration for Mae Jemison, who 15 years later became the first African American woman aboard the Space Shuttle Endeavour.
I was very much a Star Trek fan. I thought the show was very wonderful because it was one of the first programs that had everybody, all kinds of ethnic groups together from the United States. We also had a program where it put women in non-traditional roles. So Lieutenant Uhura was maybe the first woman that you saw every day or every week on television who worked in a technical field. And so that was very exciting. And also, she was African, which was a very different kind of feel from television back then. So I was very much liked Lieutenant Uhura, and she was a very wonderful person for me. I since met Nichelle Nichols, who played Lieutenant Uhura on Star Trek, and we've become friends. And then to finish the whole story off and go full circle, I appeared on Star Trek.
She's only a lieutenant, but Transporter Officer Palmer has more space flight time than the entire crew of the Enterprise put together. In real life, Lieutenant Palmer is Dr. Mae Jemison, a mission specialist who spent 8 days in orbit aboard the Space Shuttle Endeavour. Dr. Jemison was inspired to become an astronaut after seeing Lieutenant Uhura aboard the original Enterprise when she was a child.
I got to hang out with Worf, I got to meet Riker and all these kinds of things. It was a very cool experience because in many ways it was coming full circle.
The progressiveness of Star Trek literally changed the metaphorical landscape in America. But going back to television, it was not a straightforward journey from there to the next bit of broken ground. Jumping forward to 1989, a Newsweek cover story reacted to popular shows of the day like Roseanne and Murphy Brown by moaning that independent women were, quote, seizing control of prime time, and that the video pendulum has swung too far from the blissfully domestic supermom who once warmed the electronic hearth. This according to Susan Faludi's 1991 book, Backlash, The Undeclared War Against American Women, which outlined what she saw as a media-driven pushback against the feminist advances of the 1970s in America. Even within the historically progressive Star Trek franchise, it had been an uphill battle.
And Gene Roddenberry says to me, okay, you have to explain this to me.
The uphill battle was interspersed with success stories, but the most famous of these was on the initiative of the actress.
I said, what? He says, why do you want to do this? I said, Gene, do you know that before Lieutenant Uhura, black people didn't exist in the future? This is the first time we appear in the future. And I said, not only do we appear in the future, but this is a gorgeous woman, and she's the communications officer. So he says, let me think about where I could put you and what we might be able to do. I say, okay.
And yet, according to Marina Sirtis, who played Deanna Troi on Next Generation, quote, Gene Roddenberry thought we had one too many women on the show. She believed that she was only safe from being fired by actress Denise Crosby's early departure in 1988, and went on to say, the two remaining were in caring professions, so it was okay to be on a spaceship as a woman, but you had to be a nurturer. Similarly, Gates McFadden, who played Dr. Beverly Crusher, was, quote, scathing about the few times the women would be thrown together, not to work together, but to gossip, saying, if the ladies did have a scene together, we were dressed up in leotards and talking about men.
In fact, I said to Jonathan Frakes, I said, you know, I know nothing. Did I not go to Starfleet Academy? And he goes, yeah. And I went, well, where was I in all the technical classes? And he goes, you were getting your legs waxed.
Then The X-Files aired in 1993, and while it wasn't precisely action-heavy, it was co-led by Dana Scully as the rational, competent half of a flipped gender dynamic partnership. A forensic scientist in the FBI who thrives at the top of her male-dominated field, she inspired the real-life Scully effect,
where her strong-willed, intelligent character inspired a generation to pursue careers in STEM. One study showed that women who had watched 8 or more episodes of The X-Files were 27% more likely to study STEM in college and 50% more likely to work in a STEM field.
Yet there was a significant pay gap between actress Gillian Anderson and co-lead David Duchovny for the first 3 years of the show, and Anderson spent those early days required by producers to physically stand behind and never in front of Duchovny at all times. Series creator Chris Carter had even had to fight for her as their lead when the network originally wanted a leggy blonde model type. Meanwhile, Kate Mulgrew on Star Trek Voyager, which had debuted just prior to Xena's own first appearance in '95, was being warned against acting too butch. Years later, executive producer Rick Berman would say, "We wanted Janeway to be a Starfleet captain, but we also wanted her to be feminine. And those two things don't go hand in hand. If you look at a female military officer who made it to the rank of admiral, they tend not to be babes." Catherine Janeway was the newest captain of the franchise. She was a fictional trailblazer, and yet it was only a handful of years before her place in the marketing of her own show was being eclipsed by Seven of Nine, a complex and interesting character in her own right who was Janeway's crewmate on Voyager and a former Borg drone who wore 4-inch heels every day and had to be sewn into the corset of her skin-tight catsuit before filming. Even with all of these issues, they were still considered a significant outlier. Actresses in television in this era were largely on sitcoms, not in sci-fi fantasy, and certainly not often in the action-adventure genre. And in September of 1995, Xena stomped onto this television scene in flat-soled boots, nearly 6 feet tall, and the lead of her own wildly popular action show, with near unbeatable martial prowess and a decade of morally gray or straight-up evil deeds under her belt. And don't get me wrong, the network and the marketing totally knew that Lucy Lawless and the rest of the female cast were babes. The show did sultry and scantily clad frequently, and with enthusiasm, but there was something downright butch about the way that Xena stood, the way she spoke, and my girl had agency, complexity, and three-dimensionality for days. In her essay, Xena Warrior Princess Through the Lenses of Feminism, Melissa Meister states that women on television have always been defined through their interactions with men. However, the creators of Xena Warrior Princess have managed to break through this cultural paradigm. There just were no regular romantic interests on Xena. She didn't have a more feminine alternate identity. She got sweaty and dirty and angry and arrogant and vulnerable, and on an average day didn't give a flying fuck what anyone thought about her. In the 1994 book entitled Where the Girls Are, Growing Up Female with the Mass Media, Susan Douglas writes, "It's a bias of the TV industry, this belief that women will watch shows about men, but men won't watch shows about women, and therefore half the audience will be lost." And a handful of years later, in an interview with Entertainment Weekly, when Xena had already been out for 2 years, director Sam Raimi would be quoted as saying, "The audience is not afraid of watching some women break out of the conventional mold. Unfortunately, the Hollywood establishment may not be aware that the audience really wants that." According to ratings, Xena was a cult hit. It was the most popular American syndicated show by its second season. Conventions were selling out, and half of Xena's adult audience was male.
And men like the action, and they like the tongue-in-cheek humor, and they like the eye candy, I guess.
I mean, it was a little bit because of the eye candy, but in the context of the show, she's not a fighting fuck toy. She's not a sexy lamp. She's not a MacGuffin. She's not a physically strong but emotionally blank slate. She's not the only woman around for miles. She's a deeply flawed person who has joyously laid waste to entire armies, who has delighted in destruction, and who is intensely caring for those she loves.
Wait a second, you're going to have the hero put heads on pikes? Is this the way to go? And we would always say, look, it hasn't been done on TV before, but that doesn't mean that it can't be done.
She has her own identity, she has her own motivations, and just about every single episode passes the Bechdel test with ease.
Give me that hat.
What do you say?
Or else.
It's probably time to discuss the fact that the show also handled just some of the wildest action scenes American television had ever seen.
You know, they would have blowing fire. They wouldn't key it in afterwards. It's like, you're blowing fire. And when they're like, Xena bats away flaming logs, I'm like, oh, how are we going to do that? With flaming logs, that's how we're going to do it. And you're actually going to have to hit flaming logs, but that's New Zealand, you know?
So, a little known fact, Xena's legacy as an action hero is actually pretty ironic because actress Lucy Lawless notoriously hated filming the action scenes.
This horrifying life of the action star, never liked it.
She wasn't a martial arts buff, she didn't really play sports. She wasn't even one to visit the gym of her own free will.
Oh gosh, no, I didn't do all my own stunts at all. Apart from the fact that they're dangerous and they hurt, you just wouldn't have time.
Lawless also told Starlog Yearbook in 1996 that her school nickname had been Unco, for uncoordinated.
Stuntmen and women don't get anywhere near as much credit as they should, and that's part of their job description, is that their job is to make the actor look fabulous, even when the actor's a complete, an uncoordinated prat like me.
Renee O'Connor, on the other hand, loved learning the fight choreography, found ways to fit extra physical activity into her 12-hour workday whenever she could, and got joyously competent at handling her character's various weapons in her own free time.
I just loved the ability to be able to take these different weapons and not be great at them, but actually perform them enough that I could, do a little bit of damage if I wanted to, which is kind of scary.
Yet Xena is still the one who walks on screen, and with armor, without, just really looks like she could fucking kill you.
This was a good fight. I was really proud of this one. But I was only ever as good as they demanded I be, and I was always best for Peter Bell.
Knowing how we normally learn our fights, it'd be like 20 minutes before we actually had to film it, They'd go, okay, here, this is what you're going to do. But this one, they must have given you a couple days, right, to learn the entire fight? No?
When I say that Lucy Lawless hated learning to fight, I don't mean that she didn't put in the work. According to instructor Douglas Wong, she took to the training like a fish to water.
I trained a little bit with Douglas Wong in Los Angeles because I'd never done any kung fu, really no sports at all.
She breathed real fire, dealt with multiple injuries on set, and in interviews she always gave props first and foremost to the stunt team.
Certainly in a show like this, Xena is at least half stunting and editing.
Under the supervision of stunt coordinator Peter Bell, the crew was constantly innovating and bringing things to Western television that had never been done before.
This was the biggest fight we ever did, and it just went on for days. It took us to film this.
50 stuntmen and 50 crew members. All of us against the heat,
The stunt crews constructed their own makeshift rigs to imitate the style of Hong Kong wuxia films, which were at the time influencing Hollywood more than they ever had before. Their trial and error process, combined with the tight budget, even developed into something occasionally called Kiwi-style wire fu, usually filmed under the eye of the second unit.
And that was kind of a record, I think, probably in fast turnaround TV anywhere in the world, to have a second unit spend 9 days on a sequence where the main unit's only shooting 7 or 8.
We had a great crew, and if anything, they were faster and more efficient than they had been on Hercules.
The pilot episode of Xena even featured direct homage to the 1993 film The Legend of Fong Sayuk, starring Jet Li, which was one of director Doug Leffler's favorite films. Stunt workers got used to strapping themselves into their own harnesses and working through injuries.
It's the scariest time in my life. My feet hit the ground and I couldn't move them. I couldn't make them work. Apparently I'd fractured some vertebrae, the bits of the vertebrae that stick out.
But if action scenes are half stunt crew, sometimes that camera does need to be on your lead actor.
Go loose. I'm going to go do the real dangerous stuff.
And this means your fight scene is only as good as your lead is convincing. That's not an easy thing when, instead of looking hard as nails, half the action heroines on screen look like they stepped out of Taylor Swift's Bad Blood video. Don't get me wrong, many actresses have put in long hours at the gym in preparation for action roles. They did the hard work, and they got fit and toned and fight ready. Some even regularly practice multiple martial arts in their private lives, and they should be lauded for it. But with all genuine respect to the many acting talents of Angelina Jolie, Jennifer Lawrence, Scarlett Johansson, all of whom have topped Forbes' list of the most highly paid actresses in the world for multiple years, and all of whom were helped in their rise to fame by action-heavy roles, the world's highest paid action heroes look like this. And I'm not here claiming that it's easy for women to build muscle, or suggesting that physique should be prioritized over acting ability, or advocating for soul-destroying fitness regimes. But why don't more of our heroines look as though they can actually lift the weapons they use to defend themselves? Look at Serena Williams. Look at these powerlifters, and CrossFit athletes, and hammer throwers, and bodybuilders. Scarlett Johansson can obviously play any person, tree, or animal that she desires, but I personally have friends who could bench press her. I have friends of friends who could bench press her. I have friends of friends of friends who could bench press her. And hey, I'm aware that this is a topic around which we need to tread delicately. The last thing I want to do is add to unrealistic body image expectations or shame someone for being small and having no muscles. I am also small and have no muscles. I also love that smaller actors, skinny actors, actors playing characters that are conventionally feminine, have a place in the action genre too, and I respect the choreography and the acting talent that makes those fight scenes believable and enjoyable. I also recognize the unfair fucking irony of looking at an industry that essentially forces its actresses to be incredibly thin and then expecting it to produce stocky action stars from the same pool of A-listers. But there's a reason that excitement blooms in the industry, however briefly, over the potential acting careers of ex-MMA fighters. One couldn't accuse them of being particularly good at acting, or necessarily the brightest bulbs, but damn if it didn't look convincing when they were punching people. And again, there is a damn short list of heroines who look like they could actually bench press you without breaking a sweat.
Hey Vasquez, have you ever been mistaken for a man?
No. Have you?
When you do see them, they are usually background characters played by stunt women who are experts in fitness, martial arts, and sports in their private lives. And as I've mentioned, Xena was not played by an actor with interest in fitness, sports, or martial arts in her private life. So why does she still stand out on a field of her peers? In the 2011 film Colombiana, starring Zoe Saldana, the lead character, Catalea, is depicted in childhood as reading a book about Xena and dreaming of growing up to be the warrior princess herself.
I used to want to be like Xena, warrior princess.
The movie goes on to follow a grown Catalea's path of revenge against the drug lord that killed her family. Reviews of the film were mixed, but most of the praise was reserved for Saldana, who is a talented actress and, at this point, a certified action star. Most of the fight scenes in Colombiana are no more unrealistic than your average campy battle in Xena. Okay, to be entirely honest, it's hard to be less realistic than the gravity-defying action battles that were apparently taking place in ancient Greece.
That thing does not obey the laws of physics at all.
But simultaneously, they drew a lot of criticism from one specific area. Reviewers and commentators felt that Saldana was too skinny to make a realistic action hero. In fact, one derisive Vulture article entitled "Female Action Stars Have Gotten Too Skinny to Throw a Believable Punch" went so far as to say, quote, "If there's one major difference between the action heroine that Catalea idolized and the one that she has become, it's that Xena's Lucy Lawless had some believable heft to her, while Saldana resembles a supermodel who could be toppled not just by a gang of thugs but by a stiff breeze." I find the article generally condescending in tone, and you can decide for yourself if you think that this is genuine or unfair criticism, but the words "believable heft" actually ring pretty true. Over 2 decades since Xena went off the air, and we still remember the warrior princess for the way that she fought. To quote a fellow fan, Lucy Lawless was not a particularly burly woman, but somehow she made Xena seem like a fucking tank, and I don't understand how. Because when she fights, Xena has power. Her hits have visible weight. Her shoulders are broad, and she's tall as hell, and more than anything, even today, there's something revolutionary about how absolutely bug-eyed howler monkey crazy Xena's face sometimes gets when she fights. You have always classic Linda Hamilton as Sarah Connor in Terminator 2, Charlize Theron as Furiosa in Mad Max Fury Road, Daphne Keane Logan, numerous warriors from Black Panther.
Everything is fluid, but it's fluid in our own way. It's aggressive. Like, look at this right here. You got the contrast of beauty and aggression. You know what I'm saying? And the film's all about contrast here. You got one of the most beautiful people in the world making a face like, man, she's about to get it going. You know what I mean? She's ready. Can't teach that.
And whatever the fuck was going on in the Ronnie versus Lily episode of Barry.
I thought you were a dog.
Also, if you're looking for the exciting new places that the next generation of action stars could lead us, do yourself a favor and watch Prey starring Amber Midthunder. But in the years since Xena went off the air, we've also had superheroes like Jessica Alba as Sue Storm in 2007's Fantastic Four: The Rise of the Silver Surfer.
The director was like, "It looks too real, it looks too painful. Can you be prettier when you cry? Cry pretty, Jessica, just make it flat. We can CGI the tears in."
And in 2015's Avengers Age of Ultron, Elizabeth Olsen discussed Joss Whedon, at the time a man with the reputation as one of Hollywood's feminist darlings, and his directives to keep her face largely calm and serene, even in grief and rage.
You know, you're trying to do effort, but what I just did just then in slow-mo is quite literally the most unattractive thing you could ever see anyone do. It's so weird, and Joss would always remind me to use a calm face.
Okay.
Because that is okay to watch.
I really do think it's the actress's performance. I find her hollow, emotionless on screen, and there's moments where I thought her face would do something. And it's just stoic the whole, like she has the same face the whole movie.
The expressionless, always sexy female action hero, whether a result of studio directive, character choice, or acting ability, continues to dominate the screen. Xena is not that. In fact, my best friend and I have a drinking game where we take a shot every time she goes kind of bug-eyed in the middle of a fight scene, and if you do it on an average episode, by the end you're pretty drunk.
So why do they call you the warrior princess?
Because Caesar was taken.
There's a lot more to her than the one-dimensional seductress we first meet in Hercules: The Legendary Journeys, whose main goal is killing Greece's biggest hero so that her own army will be unstoppable.
See that look of fear and hatred on their faces? I used to want to see that look. It meant I was doing my job right.
Under the care of the writers for her own self-titled show, the evil Xena of the past became more wild-eyed, vicious, and cruel, determined to conquer the world, partly for the power and partly just because she loved a good kill. Her favorite pastimes included burning villages and kidnapping children and choking men to death for the sheer fun of it, hitting rock bottom as something more animal than human. In the approximate 10 years between her early Warlord days and the start of her own show, she has come a long damn way. By the time we meet her, she still has moments of slipping, doubting, of wavering back into her darker tendencies.
We're gonna kill them all!
She still seems to revel in a good fight, and that part of her that used to cackle while slitting throats will probably never be entirely gone. Yet the Xena we see on an average day is monotone and serious, Olympics grade unimpressed with your bullshit, and maintaining a veneer of calm over all of her inner batshittery, which is still very much there, hovering just beneath the surface.
What the Hades you think you're doing?
Taking command.
Subordinate to no one, more likely to focus on brute force than feminine wiles, she can also just be butch as hell. At times she's downright masculine, gruffly uncomfortable with praise, impatient with her own tears, angry at herself for moments of weakness, and reluctant to be sentimental. The season 1 episode The Path Not Taken genuinely has one of my favorite scenes in the entire series, where we see her walk into a tavern and, being beset by unwholesome figures groping and leering in her direction, casually punches her way through the crowd before sprawling herself down in a chair and propping one leg on the table like a dude.
Did you ever notice that we never have trouble getting a table?
Mystery to me.
So, who is she?
I like you.
Don't, I'm not a likable person.
She is intimidating, she loves her horse, she's nigh impossible to embarrass, she uses sex like a weapon, she uses weapons like a weapon, she has many skills, and she occasionally uses her best friend's scrolls for toilet paper. Like many iconic characters, certain elements of her personality and style also came down to the actor.
At first they thought that they'd dye my hair and would go blonde. And I thought, at the time, Gabriella Sabatini was the big noise in tennis. And I was like, what about like her? She's big and bronzed and dark-haired. And fortunately, they went that way, because my hair would have fallen out if we tried to keep it blonde.
They also wanted Xena to have a warrior cry, citing Tarzan as their inspiration, in fact. And Lawless was the one who came upon the Zagruta, the traditional Middle Eastern ululation performed at weddings, celebrations, and funerals. But one of my favorite things about Xena is that she's just genuinely, honestly kooky, with a sense of ridiculous adventure and dry wit hidden beneath her monotone.
1-0 coming up!
And I think we can again thank the cast for this one. In her own words, there were some episodes that crazy Lucy bled over onto the screen. But fun moments aside, Xena has a lot of pride. That pride is one quality that hasn't changed much from the olden days. She knows what she's good at, almost everything, and is still very, very used to being in command. She's not the type to play second fiddle, not to a general or a king or a god.
Now, I'm sure with careful consideration of the facts, we can come to the right decision.
Heads, we take on the giant.
So Xena is a woman with red in her ledger. She still struggles with good and evil, having what you might call a relapse about once per season, and spends the rest of the time carrying that burden on her shoulders.
I saw what I'd become and I was able to turn it around. But if something happened to Mother or Hercules, or you...
In Season 1's The Reckoning, she allows herself to be tried for a murder she didn't commit before ultimately choosing to live. In Season 2's Remember Nothing, she wishes that she had never picked up a sword before being shown, in the classic style of It's a Wonderful Life, what the world would be like without her. Later on, Forgiven, hardly one of the best episodes of Xena, ends with the characters being ritually cleansed of their sins, and Xena refuses to participate, clearly still believing she doesn't deserve it. Callisto, the best villain of the show and the childhood survivor of one of Xena's many slaughters, is the embodiment of all of that guilt. She was created by Xena.
I'm good! As good as you. Why not? You made me.
The same way Xena was created by the warlord who attacked her own hometown.
It was just another village to conquer. Nothing out of the ordinary. Fire broke out. And I don't know if it was one of my men or just an accident, but those flames just swept through that town like a wave of death.
So Xena bears the burden of making Callisto the way that she is.
And there was just a handful of survivors. Obviously, Callisto was one of them.
Feels hypocritical for judging her, and feels responsible for every crime that she commits.
Now she'll do anything for revenge.
I don't blame her.
I do. When will this end?
Angsty ex-assassin types have always been kind of my thing, and the way Xena deals with this is honestly always been my favorite. There is no real schism between who she is and who she was. It's not a separate personality. She never changed her name. Xena is Xena is Xena, and she'll take the consequences of her actions squarely on her own shoulders.
What happened to you? One day you just decided to fight for justice?
Something like that.
And all the shattered people you left behind were now supposed to cheer you? Is that it?
No.
Redemption is a funny concept that gets thrown around a lot in meta character discussions. People talk about redemption for villainous or simply antagonistic characters like Darth Vader, or Kylo Ren, or Severus Snape. And for me, the bar has always been set at Xena, and also at Zuko from Avatar: The Last Airbender, but we're not talking about that right now. At first glance, it may look as though Xena's redemption arc takes place during the trilogy of Hercules episodes that were her introduction. She's evil in the first, conflicted in the second, and has sworn to fight for good by the third. What makes her such a good character is that this, her riding off into the sunset, swearing to fight for justice from now on, isn't the end of her redemption arc. It's the beginning. Also, I have a pet theory that the reason it actually stuck this time, as opposed to the times previously when she'd had opportunities to start fighting for justice, is opportunity. She didn't just have a role model and then a moral compass that she wanted to do right by. Her army was physically taken away from her, and she couldn't so easily fall back into her old ways again, as she nearly does several times later in the series when that type of power is handed back to her. In the pilot episode, we see her burying her armor and her weapons, and it's viewer's choice whether she's planning to live a peaceful life or if she's planning to die. And that makes sense to me. She knows that her worst temptations come from opportunity. As the series goes on and she fights evil on the side of justice, she still wears her infamy like a cloak. Throughout the series, some people hate her, spit on her, and try to exact their revenge for the things that she's done.
That's what I think of your apology.
She spends her time walking an interesting line as someone who knows she deserves whatever they want to dish out, but who doesn't intend to die.
But you tell me this, Xena. How Have you ever been tried for all of the things you have done?
No one thing, not her trial and death, not her saving someone's life or 1,000 people's lives, could ever make up for what she has done. Saving one life doesn't cancel out taking another, and even if it had, she'd have had to toil for decades to even come close to evening the score.
Lucy Lawless is terrific in it. I love that girl who plays Callisto. The backstory of Xena's character is quite magnificent. The only thing she can do is just do good now on a day-to-day basis, but she doesn't deserve any mercy. That's rare for a male character. I mean, that's just good shit.
Even while she has friends who would absolve her of her wrongdoings, the main narrative of the show supports her perspective, not theirs.
You tell me, Xena, do you sleep well at night?
No, I don't.
What Xena teaches is that redemption isn't doing one good thing and then dying. Redemption isn't a fixed end goal that can be worked towards and arrived at. It's a journey. And the journey literally never ends.
Well fought, friend fish. Know that I don't do this for pleasure, only to live.
Don't talk to your breakfast.
There were a lot of supporting and recurring characters on Xena, played by a lot of talented actors and actresses, but I'm just gonna run down some of my favorites before we move on to bigger topics. So in no particular order,
I don't think anything will ever take away the shame and sorrow you've brought on your kinsman.
Xena's relationship with her mother, Cyrene, kind of kills me. It's a dynamic I think you really rarely get to see on television because Cyrene is afraid of her own daughter. They're uncomfortable with one another, even when they're working on forgiveness. There's blame and guilt and half a lifetime of broken trust there, and it's all wonderfully played in the pilot episode by Darian Tackle. It's the same episode where we hear the Warlord Draco warning Xena that people like them can never go home.
I tried to go home once. My father almost beat me to death with a blacksmith's hammer. You'll get the same treatment, I guarantee it.
And soon after, when Xena finally comes home after years of warlording, this is how Cyrene greets her.
Mother?
Their relationship is messy and difficult, and I honestly love it.
I wanted to come home.
Xena. I wish I could believe you.
Xena's younger brother Lysias is only in one episode, but we hear his name for the first time in the pilot, where Xena, visiting home for the first time in about a decade, goes to visit his grave. Cyrene blames Xena for his death the same way the rest of the villagers blame her for the deaths of their sons. Xena mourns him, but in the first season we never really learn much about him as a person. He's just a long-gone, once-beloved martyr. And then in season 2, in one of my favorite all-time episodes called Remember Nothing, we finally meet him. It's the It's a Wonderful Life episode. Xena gets the chance to see what the world would have been like if she had never taken up the sword. A lot of things are actually worse, but one thing at least is better. Her younger brother is alive. And he's kind of great. They look nothing alike, and he's not particularly warlike, but especially in comparison to her wet blanket of an older brother who we meet briefly in season 1, Xena and Lysias clearly have a close and loving relationship.
Maybe it's just a brother thing, but she's not herself today.
He gets her, and more importantly, he's an idealist with convictions of his own.
Taking on a slave boss, and not just any slave boss, but one who works for Mezentius.
Tell you the truth, I'm relieved.
He's not some idiot victim that Xena dragged into a fight over a decade ago.
To stop someone, anyone from being abused, legal or not.
Oh, gods deliver me, you're as bad as she is.
They're partners in crime, comrades in arms, and he's clearly a person who decided that fighting was necessary of his own volition.
Why do you think I wanted to stop Cortez? Not just to get the town back. Men like that can't go unchallenged.
And who was willing to give up his life for the cause just like she was.
But I'd rather die fighting these bastards than live with myself if I don't.
What took you so long, my dear? Finishing up my laundry?
Yes. You left something hanging on the line.
The thief Autolycus is portrayed by Bruce Campbell at his Bruce Campbellist, and he's honestly always a lot of fun. I love how the two of them bounce off of each other, and even though Autolycus isn't the character with the most depth out of everyone in the show, he has charisma for days, and it's always fun to see him show up. As an aside, the actors got to reunite in 2015 for Ash vs. Evil Dead to generally rave reviews.
Xena!
This might be a controversial one. A lot of fans hate Joxer.
Get lost. I'm fierce and I have a lust for blood. As a matter of fact, if a couple days go by and I haven't shed some blood, I get very depressed.
He's obnoxious, he likes Gabrielle, he gets between her and Xena.
You like the sight of blood so much, keep talking.
And it's all true, but he's so stupid that he activates all of my protective instincts. I kind of adore him. He was also played with great comedic skill by Ted Raimi, which I applaud.
They say you're a dangerous woman. Well, they're right.
We'll talk more about Lao Ma later, and she could also arguably go on a list of Xena's love interests as opposed to friends and allies, but she deserves a place here as well. She was one of the standout characters of the entire show due to a wonderful performance by Jacqueline Kim. Striking, gentle, and incredibly powerful, but cunning and quietly manipulative in her own way, Lao Ma was a fantastic mentor to Xena at a time in her life when no one else was gentle or kind to her. She brought Xena back from the edge and nearly got her to turn away from evil a decade before Hercules was ever in the picture.
Where is Fandes? He was trying to find a safe way around the battle. He died protecting me. Some Amazon, huh?
Effany was by far my favorite Amazon, and I'm going to be real here, it's just because Danielle Cormack is a really good actress.
My husband was ripped apart by Matoan hunting dogs, while your men watched and laughed.
She's won multiple television awards in Australia, and she always lent some wonderful grit and groundedness to any episode that she was in.
You're Xena, aren't you?
Alison Wall straight up won a New Zealand Television Award for her turn as Minya, a fairly beloved character who partially exists to poke fun at the show's fanbase, but rather than feel insulted, that fanbase largely just embraced her. She is also a thespian.
If Xena gets back, get her dressed and down to the stage fast. She isn't saying to keep this thing on the level. We're all goners. Bye-bye!
Salmonius was originally a character on Hercules, and he first meets Xena there in the Gauntlet. I really love the fact that he's seen and known her not precisely at her worst, but way before she was at her best, and then continued to be an occasional if rare companion thereafter. Robert Trebor's comedic timing is genuinely brilliant, and not unlike Autolycus and Joxer. I love that Xena's often grumpy, but secretly a bit soft on him and his antics. I've mentioned Hercules a fair few times already, so we don't need to go too much in depth here, other than to say how unfortunate it is that Kevin Sorbo turned out to be himself.
Disappointed!
Because I liked Hercules' relationship with Xena. I liked that he was just a good guy, not too exciting, but that's fine. I'm a massive sucker for outside POVs, and the idea that he and Aeolus had fought against Xena and now were her friends was just kind of fascinating to me. And yeah, he could technically also go on the romance list, so let's head there next.
Next thing you'll be telling me you're not virgins.
So let's talk about how much Xena got around. I would argue that after a lifetime of being screwed over by men she trusted, she eventually realized that screwing was a damn good entrapment technique and has been using it to great effect ever since.
Why does this always happen?
It's the blue eyes, the leather. Some guys just love leather.
More than that, though, I'm pretty sure she's just an allosexual woman who loves a good tumble and doesn't see things like modesty or bodily shame as worthwhile or as applicable to her. Try groping her, though, and she will literally breathe fire in your face.
Maybe we should continue.
Anyway, over the course of the 3-episode introduction series and the 6 seasons of her own show, I think she basically had people she was taking advantage of, like Hercules' best friend Aeolus, bad boys she liked to tumble with while they partnered up, spending some time being mutually awful to each other, but whom she later grew to respect, like Boreas.
In a way, he was the one person who really loved her when she was so unlovable, and she just used him, abused him. I think he saw her potential.
Bad boys she had unresolved sexual tension with, but didn't really respect at all and strung along more than anything, like Draco. You could also potentially put Ares in this category for going by the sizzling chemistry, and ignore the episodes that implied he might be her dad. She had evil or unscrupulous men who had screwed her over by taking advantage of her young trust and naivety.
What's your name?
Caesar. Julius Caesar.
Caesar, Julius Caesar.
Yes, that Julius Caesar. There were random one-episode dudes who were maybe powerful fighters or somewhat good at heart, but beyond that, her interest made little to no sense except for uneven scripting. There were good people she genuinely admired and maybe also felt thankful toward, like Hercules and arguably Lao Ma. Then there were bad boys she actually liked, like Marcus and Gabrielle. I've seen Xena's canonical romantic entanglements tackled through a number of different lenses in the past.
A woman's chastity is like a new hat. A beautiful thing that's going to kill me.
Is it progressive that she's so unashamedly sex positive with men and Gabrielle? Is it regressive objectification to portray her in so many sexual situations? Is it her ownership of her sexuality that's refreshing? Is it conceptually outdated for so much of her character growth to be pinned to the various men and Gabrielle?
You don't have to be a virgin to be virtuous.
You keep telling yourself that, dear.
I was married at the time.
Yes, well, we all have our little excuses, don't we?
Were you?
And I'll be honest, I'm not very interested in analyzing any of that.
Zeus, in his appreciation, turned the two lovers into oak trees. And then do you know what happened?
Somebody built a boat out of them.
Xena says some interesting things about men and romance in general.
I believe everyone will find their tree in the forest someday. Even you.
I find the strongest trees in the forest stand alone.
That's the voice of experience talking. That's a woman who's been waiting a decade to stab Julius Caesar in his stupid face. I've always been fascinated by something that she says in the first episode to Gabrielle about Gabrielle's boring fiancé. Don't worry, he dies pretty quickly. When trying to convince Gabrielle to stay with him.
He looks like a gentle soul. That's rare in a man.
But then Xena also underneath it all wants Gabrielle to stay with her. And Xena knows that she herself isn't always gentle at all.
Xena, you look good.
So do you.
Even more telling is her conversation with the warlord Draco.
Except for that ugly scar. You picked the wrong woman to get rough with.
In a world where sword fights, warlord antics, and inter-army politics featured in nearly every episode, Xena as a series was largely free of explicit rape threats or references. Maybe it was because the show, for all its ability to delve into dark themes, was angling for campy empowerment rather than gritty realism, or maybe it was because Xena herself was capable of beating the living tar out of almost everyone alive.
There's somebody in the shadows by the poplar tree. I know.
Game of Thrones, the show was not, and whatever might be said about the importance of accuracy in on-screen portrayals of human depravity, Xena's general refusal to use explicit sexual violence as a plot point is extremely refreshing in retrospect. Anyway, Draco follows up their previous discussion with this line.
I dreamt of being with you in love, or against you in battle.
Xena seems to get into a lot of love-hate relationships, or maybe a lot of I'm sexually attracted to you, but one of us is going to end up killing the other type relationships. She was happy to seduce her targets when she was evil, and seems equally untroubled in using her sexuality for her own ends once she turns good as well. Some of this might have been the show selling sex to the audience, but a lot of it just outlined the fact that Xena was far from a shrinking violet. She had sex with Boreas on a horse, for God's sake. If we temporarily take the issue of inconsistent characterization in early seasons, back when they still thought the audience wanted to see one-off romantic entanglements, and set that aside, Girl had a pretty bad track record, and she definitely had a thing for bad boys. I do hesitate to phrase it this way because bad boy is usually used in the context of Bonnie and Clyde, some sweet innocent girl meets a rebellious dude and gets corrupted sort of way. Xena had a thing for bad boys in the sense that she also used to be a bad person. In season 1's A Fistful of Dinars, we learn that many years ago, Xena was engaged to be married to some motherfucker, I forget his name, we'll call him the fiance, who then sort of lost interest once he'd conquered her affections and they both fucked off to do their own thing. She never trusted him again until he died saving Gabrielle and turned out to be not such a schmuck after all. I don't know what to do with that shit other than to point out that the general themes of the episode, Xena's youthful innocence, her willingness to join up with a powerful and untrustworthy man for the sake of her own personal gain, and her blindness to his eventual betrayal, would come roaring back with a vengeance only a season later. In season 2, The episode Destiny grants us a flashback to her early warrior years, where Caesar, probably her longest and most consistent human enemy outside of Callisto, tricked her, betrayed her, and took away the last of her innocence as well as her sanity for a while. It's something that the grown-up Xena would never have fallen for, but chronologically she's not even 20 years old when it happens, and boy does it mess her up. As was so skillfully written in the 2009 essay, Xena Warrior Princess, Role Model for the Ages, Xena's biggest mistake with Caesar was believing that he saw her as she saw herself, the self-reliant, independent woman worthy of him because she was his equal. The betrayal, the injuries, the death of her only remaining ally, all of these things broke Xena in a way that few things would before or after. She went from a power-hungry local warlord on a slippery slope to an absolute bloodthirsty maniac. And hot take here,
a new Xena is born tonight, with a new purpose in life.
She never 100% went back.
Death.
I admittedly kind of love how even several seasons down the line, Xena loses some of her usual stone-cold rationality when dealing with Caesar, as if every time she sees him, she can't help but be re-enveloped in the fury and anguish and humiliation of being left for dead on that beach. There's something very compelling about a character who's usually cool as beans, just losing a little of her self-control around this one asshole who taught her an awful lesson about trust more than a decade ago. The only other man in her life to consistently bring out such complicated emotions is Ares, the god of war, who depending on the episode might have been her lover or maybe her dad. It was ancient Greece, just try not to think about it. Ares has been instrumental in shaping Xena's life from the shadowy sidelines and reveled from afar in the destruction that she wrought. He gave her guidance, strength, blessing, favor. She gave him war and death, and it probably turned both of them on more than a little bit. He felt personally scorned and infuriated by her eventual turn away from evil, and he spends the rest of the series trying to trick and cheat her back into her old ways. I honestly am not crazy about the idea that all of her imperviousness to Ares' wiles, general resistance to the flirtations of powerful men was only as a result of bitterness from youthful experience.
You join with me, we'd make an invincible team.
Rather than, logic. But there you go. And then at the end of all things, there is, of course, Gabrielle.
Why do you do that? You do have weapons, don't you?
I like to be creative in a fight. It gets my juices going.
Can we cook with your juices?
Who she loves, teaches, protects, lies to.
You gave me your word.
Who is lied to by.
Does she often leave you in the dark with her plans?
No.
But she has done it, hasn't she?
And is occasionally betrayed by.
There you go again. You're always blaming me for everything. Xena, why is it never your fault?
Isn't that a thing I like to think about sometimes? But this time, their destiny is written in the stars. They make peace and they journey on together. Xena also had a magic baby. I don't know where else to talk about that shit, so I guess we're gonna do it here. I absolutely adore the backstory involving Xena and her first child, Solon.
I couldn't be the mother you deserve.
She had given birth to Solon back when she was still pretty evil, and had given him away to be raised in secret by someone else.
And I regret that I missed your first step, your first word.
Even back then, she'd known that the best thing she could do for him would be to get him away from her. Then there was this whole thing where Gabrielle was impregnated by the devil and gave birth to a clone of herself who murdered Xena's son and led them into a violent cycle of mutual blame that culminated in a musical episode.
All consequences are your own creation, and there's a price you must pay.
But that's not important right now. Xena's magic baby came in around season 5, mostly because Lucy Lawless was pregnant in real life. On the upside, there was something kind of groundbreaking about a pregnant warrior having sword fights on primetime television, but on the downside, it became one of those magical impregnation, destiny, alien baby type tropes. Good shows that I like, seem to do this all the time. Amy in Doctor Who, Sharon in Battlestar Galactica, Scully in X-Files, Gwen in Torchwood. A leading woman gets pregnant, however briefly, and it has to be a magical impregnation that aliens put there, or that secret secretly spells the doom of all mankind.
So how long is this going to take?
Well, on Earth it can last days.
I have killed man for less.
Wombs being used as a plot device is just annoying to me, and I genuinely wish that Xena had just gotten randomly knocked up by accident instead, or that the ever-friendly Aphrodite had decided to give the happy, probably bisexual couple a gift in the form of a bun in the oven. Instead, because it was season 5 and the writing for the show had taken what you might call a turn, Xena's second child, a daughter named Eve, who is destined to bring death to all the gods of Mount Olympus, was the result of immaculate conception via a reformed divine Callisto, thus enabling cracked-out parallels to be drawn between Xena and the Virgin Mary, which, no thank you. All of this relationship talk might lead you to wonder,
Does Xena ever think about settling down and getting married?
No, she likes what I do.
So let's talk about Gabrielle.
I almost got you that time.
No, you didn't.
I was this close.
You were this close because I let you get this close. I think Gabrielle was the audience. She was every man. And you needed to have that. Otherwise, it's like straight men in comedy. You know, if you don't have the straight man, something's not funny.
The earlier incarnations of Gabrielle remain my favorite. Renee O'Connor is a talented, funny actor with abs for days who could undeniably whoop my ass if she tried. But as the seasons went on, her outfits got tinier and her weapons got pointier, and I wasn't always convinced that the dual knife thing was the most natural progression for her character. Her growth from being a naive, wide-eyed girl with dreams of being a bard in season 1 to being a competent and independent woman with complex moral struggles of her own in later seasons was absolutely a satisfying one.
I played judge, jury, and executioner.
You only did what I told you to.
I had a choice. I made it.
Gabrielle, I put you into a situation I had no right to.
But I know you were right.
It wasn't right for you. That's not who you are. How many more times are you gonna follow me into battle, huh? How many more times am I gonna hurt you?
But simultaneously, she had a tendency to be gullible.
Your Highness, you said you would let Xena go.
Or short-sighted sometimes.
One of the other observations about the debt is that she had other motivations when she went to Qin to stop Xena from being the murderer. She went there because she was jealous.
Say it!
She's trying to save Xena, right? From being a murderer, when if you look at her history, Gabrielle's still trying to change her, you know? Yeah. Don't kill this one person because you'll never go back, right?
I know you hate me, Xena. No more than I hate myself.
Scratch my nose, will you? Come on.
I was slower to forgive than our eponymous hero was. I was a spiteful 9-year-old. What you can't really deny, though, is that she is Xena's best friend.
No, look, you promise me. If something happens to me, you will not become a monster.
You're changing, Gabrielle. I like you just the way you are, okay? Go get some sleep.
No. No, you promise me.
She's loving, she's kind, she works as Xena's moral compass, sort of in the same way, if you'll forgive the comparison, that the Doctor on Doctor Who needs a companion sometimes to curb his wilder impulses. Xena is gentle with Gabrielle in a way she is with almost no one else. The show straight up admits that they're soulmates. There's also an absolutely heart-pounding scene at the end of season 4 where Callisto finally takes Xena out of commission, and Gabrielle, having recently sworn off weapons altogether in a quest for peace and pacifism, just absolutely starts murdering people left and right in order to save Xena's life. I remember watching this moment on television when it first aired, and Renee O'Connor sells the absolute hell out of it. And, well,
all you have to do is you stick your hand under the water and you feel around till you find a great big succulent fish, and then you do this.
It's not my idea of fun.
Well, don't knock it till you've tried it.
So in retrospect, one thing is particularly obvious to me now as an adult in a way that it totally wasn't as a prepubescent watching the show when it first aired.
That's just great. It's gonna smell like fish for days.
And it is that by the finale, Xena and Gabrielle were in a really blatant non-platonic relationship. The year was 1995. The very first on-air kiss between two women in American television history had only been featured in the legal drama LA Law about 4 years prior, in 1991. Then, in 1994, a parental advisory warning was posted before the scene where Roseanne Barr kissed another woman on her self-titled show. At the time that Xena aired its pilot episode, the first lesbian marriage on American network TV wouldn't happen for another year. Ellen DeGeneres would not come out and face the subsequent cancellation of her show for another 2 years. Will and Grace wouldn't air for another 3 years. The L Word wouldn't for another 9. These were the times. Literal decades away from shows like Modern Family, from Pose, from Heartstopper, from Orange is the New Black, and from Our Flag Means Death. And it was in this social atmosphere that Xena became famous, or depending on who you spoke to, infamous for its subtext. To hear it told today, the evolution of Xena and Gabrielle's half-spoken relationship was half the result of coy winks and playful nudges by the writing and production teams, half the result of audience interpretation, and the actors themselves were more or less the last to know.
Which was a surprise to me and Renee. I remember it was like the 8th episode in, and we saw something from the Village Voice about the lesbian relationship between these two, and we were like, what, are they crazy? And of course, Rob and Liz Friedman, the writers, were like, wow, like they knew what they were doing. It was just me and Renee who were like...
Lesbian writer and producer Liz Friedman, who was with the show from 1st through 4th seasons, said in a 1996 interview with The Advocate that, quote, "We never wrote Xena to be a lesbian, but it's not our show, it's the audience's show. If the fans want to read Xena that way, great." She went on to say, "They're such a perfect little butch femme couple. What they do between episodes, I don't know." The show had only been out for about a year, and it would be the most ambiguous interview she would probably ever give on the topic. As an aside, if you try to call this show queerbaiting today, please remember the era of television that we are discussing. This was not Sherlock, this was not Supernatural or Once Upon a Time. This was a show literally being made 20 years ago under the veil of censorship, closer today to something like The Untamed on Netflix than an endless tease like Supergirl.
If there was a line, I'm sure we just stepped over it every single time.
So actually, that's not the way the episode started. Remember when they first wrote it? That Gabrielle was supposed to be in love with Xena?
At the time, Aphrodite blows her perfume and causes obsessions.
Gabrielle's looking at all these weird sexual positions on the wall.
That's not humanly possible. Sure it is.
Joxer was looking at the 8-man story. Xena was looking at the fish. Gabrielle was looking at Xena.
Well, the studio read that.
And it was actually, I remember, 2 days before we started shooting, and the studio just said, you cannot do this.
De Beers will pull out, all our advertisers will pull out. Steve and RJ sat down over the weekend and took a change Gabrielle obsessed with sexual positions with Xena to Gabrielle obsessed with herself.
I would like to see what it would have been like if Gabrielle had been obsessed with Xena for that episode.
Xena, I finally realized there can only be one person for me in my life. Me.
According to executive producer Rob Tappert, showrunner RJ Stewart was also careful, not wanting to take advantage of the audience or reduce the relationship to pandering.
Come on. Wake up and breathe. Come on, fight!
Xena.
Fight!
Xena! It's time to stop now.
Don't leave me! Don't leave me! Wake up! Wake up!
Pascal pals.
On the flip side, the studio was so worried that Xena would be perceived as a lesbian show that Xena and Gabrielle were not allowed to appear together anywhere in the same shot of the opening titles.
No!
Let it pass over.
Please wake up.
Gal pals.
Watching at home as a child, I wasn't completely unaware of the rumblings of Xena being a lesbian show.
So you know, I am a certified member
of
the Z Night Club.
I have the Z-Night newsletter, and somebody sent me an all the Xena trading card.
That's from the internet.
But was mostly aware of it via mildly distasteful teasing from amused family members, which was a lot to unpack when I finally returned to the show as a more self-assured adult and fell in love with it all over again.
You are the most dear thing to me in all the world. And yet instead of protecting you, I'm here because I want to be here.
I love you, Xena.
Meanwhile, Xena's status as an LGBT icon was quickly becoming the stuff of legend. There were essays, there were magazine features, there were theses, there were...
May the same force that molded the beauty of these rose petals bless your union.
Oh my God! Xena slipped to the tongue! Where did that come from? What's going on there?
So now I understand. I get it now. I mean, what were we thinking? Of course.
I can't imagine why people thought there was subtext in this.
I've never been with a man before.
I said man.
No one from among the show's production went on to acknowledge it more than producer Liz Friedman. In 1996, on 1 in 10, a Boston-based LGBT radio program, she said, "That's one of the best parts of the job, getting to throw in references that I know fans who are interested in that will pick up on, but don't necessarily flash any irrevocable red lights. We opened up a show with the two of them fishing naked, and we're about to have a Halloween episode that will certainly have some nice moments for our queer fans. A little lesbian vampire show."
Joxer's always curiously ignorant about their sexual relationship. And I'm certain he's never seen them without their clothes once. Sure, they tell him, Joxer, go to the hill, 5 miles, take a hike, and then come back.
In season 2, Xena and Gabrielle shared a sort of on-screen kiss, and the follow-up was the most highly watched episode in the entire series to date. We don't have empirical data on this, but it's largely thought to be because about a bajillion queer women tuned in to see if it would happen again.
No, I have no poison dart marks. I have no Buckeye bites.
Is that a hickey? Lucy Lawless added that line in. It was a very funny line.
By season 3, the flings and romps with male characters were steadily dwindling, and Lucy Lawless, in a 1997 interview with Playboy magazine, was playfully joking that Xena's dream vacation would be a biennial sailing trip to Lesbos.
Oh, I remembered that. It was a freeze frame, right? I think at the end of the show, you got these over my...
She grabbed them, put them where they are, and we ran with it.
As early as 1998, there were rumors of a prospective episode featuring the poet Sappho, played either by Lucy Lawless herself or by out lesbian actress Katie Lang, falling in love with Gabrielle. An anonymous and unconfirmed source later said the episode had been shelved because it would be impossible for subtext to not become, well, main text. In the same year, SNL poked gentle fun at the show's lesbian fan base.
How about after the show, me and you go grab a beer and shoot some pool?
And an all-lesbian marching team comprised of 122 marchers attended the 30th annual Sydney Gay and Lesbian Mardi Gras Festival, dressed as Xena. The marching Xenas would continue appearing in pride parades far and wide. In 1999, Lucy Lawless and Renee O'Connor attended the same festival themselves, and Subaru winked at Xena fans in a lesbian-focused car ad. By the year 2000, a small fan committee had raised the funds for a Xena-themed parade float on an 8-ton flatbed truck, complete with the banner reading, "Temple of Xena, Warrior Daikon." I have been tragically unable to find pictures from that year. Then in 2001, the same year that known dickhead Kevin Sorbo whined publicly that Xena was different from Hercules due to its being, and I quote, heavily into lesbianism, Episode 19 of Season 6 featured Xena buying Gabrielle tickets to see a performance by Sappho.
I had Sappho jot something down for you. A poem?
You know, like gal pals do. The same year, Lucy Lawless pretty officially outed Xena in an interview with Conan O'Brien, and a couple of years later, in a 2003 interview with Lori Medigovich of Lesbian News, Lawless said, Gay, definitely. They're married, man. Then, speaking with Michael Musto for Out magazine, she said again, when there's smoke, there's got to be fire. It was clear from the writing that it was a love relationship. The interviewer also asked if post-finale, Gabrielle was now having sex with Xena's ghost, to which she obviously replied, "I hope so." Notably, Lawless was also named the Star 100 Ally of the Year at the Australian LGBTI Awards in 2017, after once again attending Sydney Mardi Gras. And while we're on the subject of Xena's record with the LGBT+ community, I guess this is as good a place as any to talk about actor Karen Dior and the season 2 episode Here She Comes, Miss Amphipolis. It was the beauty pageant episode of Xena, and it featured our heroes taking on secret identities within the competition in order to solve a mystery, prevent a murder, and potentially stop a war.
You sent urgent word for us to come and see some underdressed, overdeveloped bimbos in a beauty contest?
For those not in the know, Lucy Lawless was the former Mrs. New Zealand of 1989.
A beauty pageant is like a war. To win, you've got to be fired with the heat of competition. The power. The passion.
Anyway, one of the other contestants was Miss Artifice, played by bisexual former adult film star and HIV/AIDS activist Karen Dior. There are a few places that the script pokes fun at Miss Artifice, but the episode largely handles her with grace, dignity, and sympathy.
I was just trying to scare you.
Why'd you want to scare me?
Because I knew you knew.
What made you think I'd tell?
The character was created by Chris Mannheim, the writer for this episode, in honor of her brother, a drag performer who had passed away due to complications with AIDS in 1992. In fact, the episode is dedicated to him, in loving memory of Keith K. Walsh. The episode also earned them their only GLAAD Award nomination.
This is a chance to use a part of me most people usually laugh at. Or worse.
Karen Dior, whose legal name was Jeff Gann and who used male pronouns for the duration of his life, so that's what we'll use here as well, had also been diagnosed with AIDS in 1995. He ultimately passed away in 2004 from AIDS-related complications, and like many others of his generation, and the one gone before, deserved so much better.
I just hope you let me quit the pageant in private instead of going public with it.
May the best person win.
In 1997, when his episode of Xena aired, the Reagan administration was well over, but stigma against those who suffered from HIV/AIDS was still rife, and misinformation about how the disease could be passed, for example, through a kiss, absolutely abounded in the mainstream. It caused a stir then when the episode ended with Miss Artifice kissing Xena full on the mouth. And it was apparently Lucy Lawless's idea, specifically with the purpose of challenging that stigma. In an interview with New Zealand Women's Day in 1997, Gann was quoted as saying, "It was just supposed to be one of those beauty pageant kisses on the cheek, but Lucy suggested that I grab her, dip her, and give her a really passionate kiss instead." And yeah, Miss Artifice is wearing Xena's clothes in that scene. It's complicated, don't worry about it. We're gonna talk about the costume next.
I know. Wisdom before weapons. I'll keep this for the time being. It's not like your breasts aren't dangerous enough.
The outfits in Xena largely took shape under the watchful eye of Nyla Dixon, legendary costume designer who brought home a New Zealand Film and Television Award for her work on the 3rd season, and who would later go on to win an Academy Award for The Lord of the Rings.
Rob desperately wanted a new outfit, but he forgot to have this specific discussion.
For this
And at the last moment, like the day before, he said to Nyla, "We've got this outfit coming I need for tomorrow." And I think Nyla actually burst into tears.
I said, "Oh, you know what, Nyla, it doesn't really matter. It's okay. You don't have to come up with a costume for that. I'm so sorry I forgot it," and blah, blah. Well, lo and behold, she came up with this wonderful costume for this crazy, sexy tango dance, and it was exactly what it needed. And so she's another person who, besides being blessed with great talent, will go the extra mile.
I still think it was the greatest learning curve ever. Vastly collaborative, outrageous, good fun.
Lucy Lawless donated her own version of the costume to the Smithsonian in 2006. Xena's original costume, though, as well as the others in the Hercules 3-parter, was designed by costume expert Barbara Dara.
My intent was to find something really interesting and cool and fresh and different. So she had the skirts that were slightly Roman influenced, and then the armour, which came from inspired by the architecture of the Nouveau.
And also bats, apparently. Yeah, I don't know.
What about that outfit?
I found this vile garment in my chamber. No offense. None taken.
Action heroines in sexy outfits are not a precisely new concept.
And at first, I do remember being quite embarrassed walking around in quite such a short skirt. And we would wear these big, long underpants underneath. And eventually the producers went, you know what, that looks stupid. Can you just put on regular underpants, please?
Feminine versions of traditional warrior garb, except with more corseting and a lower cut, are still pretty much the norm.
I think I found your disguise. The assistant to some terriers would wear no less.
Any less and there wouldn't be.
While one end of the action spectrum does post practical outfits, like those worn by Ellen Ripley or Cara Thrace, the other side of the costuming scale has historically teetered towards Boris Vallejo, pin-up girls with swords and goddamn high heels.
You had the unmitigated gall to let that chick, the new girl who plays my mother, Queen Armadillo, or whatever her name is. I mean, I bet she even got to wear a bra, even though you told me I couldn't, because there was no underwear in space.
Sometimes we can even see a character evolve in or out of this state. One who is introduced as intelligent and comparatively utilitarian, but is later, even if temporarily, silenced and displayed as eye candy. Similarly, there are examples of the opposite, where a character's introduction featured more shallow characterization and frequently put them on display for voyeuristic enjoyment, but who, under the care of a different creative team, were allowed to flourish and become more three-dimensional and more practically dressed.
It's so cool, right?
It's good, yes.
And you can put so much stuff in there, you wouldn't even know.
And inarguably, Xena Warrior Princess had some ridiculous bikini-inspired midriff-bearing outfits. Gabrielle's shirts and skirts just got consistently smaller as the seasons went on. Don't get me wrong, I think this outfit is gorgeous. I'm just a little annoyed they had Renee wearing it during fight scenes. But as we've covered, Xena and realism were not precisely friends. I'd also love to see a proper breakdown of someone comparing Nyla Dixon's costumes with those made by Jane Holland after she took over in season 5.
These are my big old boots, which have got, you know, Nikes on the inside. And though the new costume designer would love to change them and make them look sleeker and make them look better, these are the most functional for what we need to do for fighting. In the 5th season I had those black boots, and they were, they might have looked good, but they were just awful to work in. I couldn't run, but being pregnant I didn't run very much. So, big old knee pads, again, very functional. I'd love to make them sleeker, and they may well streamline those this season, but I sure like them for comfort.
Still, up through season 4 especially, they also put their characters in shaman-inspired furs and some decidedly unsexy evil warlord garb, all of which I hated as a child for being too weird and eccentric, but all of which I now begrudgingly respect as an adult. Xena's usual outfit, of course, was a little skimpier.
That's my breastplate, and it lifts and separates. Carved by a wonderful Maori artist. India, and he did the design, and it all means something. All this is Maori design, and it's to do with wahine, which is women and empowerment, and he designed this fabulous piece of art.
Traditional Maori designs, some have suggested, such as the koru, which is based on the native silver fern.
The bodice was all in one piece, and they've remade that, make it into two, so it didn't wrinkle up so much with all the, hip kicks and...
As the 3-off became a spin-off, Xena's iconic leather and bronze went through a few design alterations for comfort and practicality.
You got to figure out the boning and the length of things, because if your side ribs are cramped, you're prone to panic attacks because you can't breathe, and then human beings don't like that feeling. No animal likes that feeling of not being able to breathe. So I do remember having to go, oh my God, somebody untie me.
So that's not great, obviously. If your lead is portraying a wayfaring warrior, you'd think the emotional and physical comfort of the outfit would be a higher priority. And I am always for better armor, both for the sake of historical accuracy and for believability, as well as for the sake of providing actresses and stunt women with proper protection.
The stunt girls wear ones made out of foam and that are painted bronze, and I wear this one, which is not so good for landing on, but we're changing them out these days. I get to wear a stunt one on the back.
I would like to point out a double standard in the way that certain detractors try to automatically dismiss Xena's costume as impractical, or even claim that it detracts from the show's standing as a tentpole. To be clear, I'm not here to write an essay comparing the bare chests and leather speedos of 300 to the cleavage-flashing, stomach-bearing corsetry of Xena. Objectification, unrealistic standards, and fetishized bodies can exist on all sides of the spectrum, but we all know there's an inherent difference between a property created with the intent of portraying their characters as hyper-masculine, pride-driven, and a wish-fulfillment ideal, and a property created with the intent of portraying an actress sexually for the sake of the usually male audience's enjoyment. But still, for all this, I'm fairly defensive of Xena's costume. You can say that she's showing too much skin, or needs more armor, or call it fetish wear, but she's genuinely not showing much more skin than your average hoplite warrior in ancient Greece. I mean, yes, her chest is obviously more visible, and she's not wearing a helmet, because heroes in modern film and television almost never wear helmets. And she's not carrying a shield, for much the same reason. But her costume is essentially just the busty version of this. I mean, Xena comes partially from the sword and sandal type films, which featured Steve Reeves dressed like this for 1958's Hercules. And the episode of Hercules: The Legendary Journeys that Xena was introduced in literally opened like this. Besides, things like plate armor were rare for ancient foot soldiers. Gladiatorial armor was showy and sparse, covering at best. Artwork shows ancient Egyptian infantry as sporting no armor at all. And according to Greek historian Polybius, some Celts, according to legend, ran into battle naked. Obviously take that with a grain of salt. Above all else, she is still tragically a standout among female action heroes, aside from your Ellen Ripleys and your Sarah Cotters in their pseudo-military gear, for wearing flat fucking shoes.
What's actually quite cool about these boots is that there's actually a running shoe inside there. Because it's an action show, they were doing heaps of running, and so rather than have really uncomfortable boots that you could hardly move in, they wanted to just give that freedom of movement.
Gal Gadot's Wonder Woman wears wedges. Natasha Romanoff wore wedges. Trinity wore chunky heels. The characters in Into the Badlands and Underworld and Rush Hour and Charlie's Angels and Batman and Suicide Squad and Guardians of the Galaxy and the goddamn Lady in Jurassic World all wore high heels during major action scenes. Dana Grant, longtime horseback stunt woman for Xena, who also went on to work on Wonder Woman, spoke in detail in multiple interviews about how the worst stunt injury of her life was caused by a pair of flimsy high heels that caused her to slip, become impaled by a dagger to the face, and go into cardiac arrest.
My worst injury would have been I had a dagger go through my head, went through my cheek, through both nasal cavities into the back of my head, fractured the back of my left eye socket, and I ended up going into cardiac arrest on the hospital floor.
So flat soles aren't just a stylistic choice, they are important for safety.
Just really turn the idea of femininity on his head. You know, a lot of times you see Wakanda's walking around barefoot. It's a barefoot culture. Sometimes it's barefoot, sometimes it's sandals. First thing she does after she slams this goon's head into this here table is she's gonna use another weapon that she has. She's gonna use that high heel. She's gonna take that off, and she's gonna drag that right across another bad guy's face. Boom!
And the idea of putting your lead actor in comfortable sneakers and literally building the boot around them should not still be revolutionary, but here, as in so many other ways, the series was ahead of its time. I would also be remiss if I didn't mention the soundtrack, which is almost a trademark of its own within the world of Xena, alongside the iconic outfit and the sweeping New Zealand landscape. Composer Joseph Loduca was a longtime collaborator of Rob Tappert and Sam Raimi.
His scores really elevated the whole genre of television music at the time.
He then worked on, among other things, He-Man, Leverage, Spartacus, Ash vs. Evil Dead, and Chucky. The most well-known parts of the Xena soundtrack are its various non-English anthems, namely the main title and a battle track entitled Warrior Princess. which accompanied Xena from her first appearance on Hercules. Apparently, Loduca had written an Eastern European-style chant for an earlier episode that producer Rob Tappert loved, and from there came up with the idea of Bulgarian singing. Xena hailed from Amphipolis, which was in the ancient region of Thrace, while the city was firmly within modern-day Greece. What was once known as Northern Thrace is now within the official boundaries of the country of Bulgaria. The name Xena means guest or stranger in Greek, and the production and the actors have both implied that the character's heritage lies here in the north, perhaps amid the Balkans. This is partially reflected in the soundtrack, where they brought together a Bulgarian women's chorus with Eastern European rhythms and heavy drums, the Bulgarian kaval flute, the gaida bagpipes, cymbals and conches, and didgeridoos. It was dark, it was exotic, it was warlike and fantastical, and it resulted in 7 Emmy nominations for Loduca before the show was over. It also helps when your main star has a Broadway-ready set of pipes and can contribute to some of the most haunting and memorable tracks on the show. Nowhere is this more evident than in Xena's first and best stab at a musical episode, Season 3's The Bittersweet, which predates the famous Buffy episode by 3 whole years and is an absolutely wild trip of a story.
With one look you can wilt a flower,
with several of the main cast singing their own songs,
My life propelled out of control.
while others were matched with startling accuracy by professional singers, like the late Michelle Nicastro for Callisto. With lyrics contributed by multiple guest writers and dances choreographed by Broadway veteran and multi-Tony Award nominee Jeff Calhoun, the music of The Bittersweet resulted in 2 Emmy nominations. It is also one of the best showcases of the many skills of the late, great Kevin Smith.
You are the most divine, delicious warrior.
And speaking of him, the script for this video essay is already at 15,000 words.
A man can't help saluting your return.
But let's talk villains for a hot second.
And if you start my heart, it's just the way you slash and burn.
This is going to be a highly abridged rundown of the greatest hits, as opposed to a comprehensive list of every antagonist ever to grace the show. And if you've watched Xena, you probably already know who I'm planning to talk about. Callisto, played spectacularly by Hudson Leek, is probably still the biggest fan favorite out of every villain on the show. And to anyone uninitiated, I understand how this outfit and her slight build might call to question how convincing she could possibly be as a warlord or a villain, but ignore that. Trust me, Callisto was anything but generic.
No, of course not. No, it's not her fault at all that I dream every night of my mother's screams coming from my burning home.
And half the reason it works is because the way Leek plays her is absolutely wild.
Slit her throat.
Slit her throat?
Yes. Pierce the skin under the chin with the blade and tear a hole this way. Like this.
We've talked a little bit about her already. She's the embodiment of Xena's guilt.
Now I'm a painful reminder of what you used to be and how you may never leave it behind.
Callisto has every right to kill Xena, but Callisto doesn't have the right to kill the innocent people she's killing. Therein lies, that's a great conflict. I mean, that is just fantastic.
Callisto is somehow both more evil and more pitiable than Xena was at her worst.
Perfect. I'm gonna die just like my family.
And she's fun. Just so much fun. She was also genuinely dangerous, genuinely tragic, and never used a single expression, emotion, or gesture when 5 would do.
You let me go, and I will dedicate my life to killing everything you love.
There's also a series of episodes where Xena and Callisto swapped bodies during the period where Lucy Lawless had a broken pelvis after a horse stunt gone wrong for a Jay Leno skit, and both actors did a genuinely spectacular job adopting one another's body language and speech style. This brings us to Ares, as portrayed by Kevin Smith. He was probably the longest running villain on the show, the invisible force that mentored Xena through her evil years, brought her to her chakram, reveled in every war that she started and atrocious deed she committed. She was, in his eyes, his greatest accomplishment. And as I mentioned, when she turned away from his path, he took it pretty personally. Like, it's actually hilarious how mad and scorned he is about it. He spends a lot of the show trying to convince her to return to him, to greater or lesser success. Their dynamic is fun. Kevin Smith is overwhelmingly charismatic on screen, and he also got more opportunities to stretch his skills as the show went on. There's a whole episode in season 6 where he's lost his godhood, and Xena somewhat sadistically tries to teach him to live on a farm while nostalgically reliving her own childhood, and it's one of my favorite fluff episodes.
Xena, this is impossible. How can you this is Rome. You can't.
There's a sentence in there just dying to get out.
The last member of what you might call the Big Three was Julius Caesar, portrayed with perfect smug condescension by a young Karl Urban. There are just no words for how much I hated this man as a child. He had betrayed Xena, he had humiliated her and broken her, he didn't respect her. I hated him more than I'd ever hated anyone in my life, except for this one guy from the 1959 film Journey to the Center of the Earth. He'd killed a pet duck named Gertrude. I was 8 years old and I wanted him dead. It was a whole thing. Anyway, as a massive Lord of the Rings fan, I cannot describe my shock on realizing this absolute bastard bane of my existence was also Eomer of Rohan. As I mentioned earlier in the essay, Caesar met Xena when she was young and naive. There's no continuity to the Xena timeline, but at a guess she was still in her late teens. She captured him, seduced him, and ransomed him back to Rome, parting on what seemed to be good terms. Thinking that he was now an ally, they planned to meet again, but instead he brought an army with him, killed all her people, broke her legs, and left her to die. Whenever they meet again in the series, there's an incredible sense of tension due to their long, messy history, lots of mutual disdain, and that weird energy of two people who used to have sex a lot and now despise each other. My last favorite villain came later on in the show, and while she isn't quite on par with the other three, I think she's definitely worth mentioning here. And that's Alti, portrayed by Claire Stansfield.
Help me, and I'll make you the destroyer of nations.
I don't include her on the list because I think the writing necessarily utilized her in the best way possible going forward, or because the flashbacks to her time with Xena make a huge amount of sense within the timeline, but because Stansfield portrayed her with convincing power and menace. She always felt a little not human, a little too mysterious, all-seeing, too mystic for Xena to just beat hand to hand. The actress had this fantastic throaty voice, and she also had a lot of presence, and you need that if you're going to be a convincing and worthy antagonist against Lucy Lawless. You need to be able to stand toe-to-toe with her and either look or act just as impressive. And it's not just because Xena is tall and pale-eyed and dark-haired and those things make for a powerful combination. They were consistently hiring gorgeous model types in an attempt to hit this combination again. Like with Velasca, with Livia, with Varia. They tried to make Livia a whole lot of something by giving her the nickname the Bitch of Rome, but we all know who that really is. And look, respect where it's due. Velasco was a lot of fun and Varia had a lot of fans, but lightning never quite struck twice. Even Athena was a well-acted antagonist, but it's an issue when your day-to-day protagonist is just straight up more intimidating than the literal goddess of wisdom and warfare. Just before we close out this section, shout out to a few honorable mentions. First and foremost, Najara, one of the only warriors to ever actually straight up beat Xena in a fight. Xena is such a sore loser that it's genuinely hilarious. Like, she's good at so many things that she's always on the back foot for a second when she finds someone of her own skill level.
Well, this is your lucky day.
And because she's never really had to learn how to lose graciously, she's just so bad at it.
Oh, we don't have to run for it. I'm gonna slap these bitches silly.
I know their personalities are worlds apart, but sometimes I feel like she and Thor would actually get along really well.
I mean, this Thanos we're talking about, he's the toughest there is.
Well, he's never fought me.
Yeah, he has.
He's never fought me twice.
Moving on, there's also Dayhawk and Hope, whose arc was tied into some of the most emotional and tumultuous times on the show. We also get a lovely, fun performance here from Renee O'Connor. Any of the show's doppelganger episodes were a great opportunity to watch the actors show off their range. As an aside, the birth of Hope and everything that unfolds from it also makes for such an interesting lesson on character perspective. Gabrielle is traumatized from her experience, desperately clinging to the idea that she can pull something bright from the darkness, potentially being influenced by the evil wiles of the creature that was in her womb, and convinced that she can nature versus nurture, raise her half-human, half-demonic child to be an ethical person. Xena, who has all the experience of a brutal killer but is a mother herself, whose moral line has always been drawn at murdering babies, and who would usually do anything to protect a child of Gabrielle's, sees Hope as something more like a demonic tumor, a thing in the shape of an infant who has more real kinship with the chest bursters from Alien. Xena turns out to be right, of course, but you can see why, in the moment, Gabrielle's actions may have seemed not only more compassionate, but even more logical. Anyway.
All right. Now all four of you.
Draco, who is always a good fun time. Also this thing. I thought this thing was cool. Anyway, the main villain of the show is plot consistency, so...
One day, a great warrior will be born to our people. He will become our king and lead us in our fight against the barbarians.
And we'll know who he is because only he will be able to pull out the sword.
Nice blade.
Did you...
A few years ago, I started a casual discussion on social media regarding my opinion that, given how a Xena reboot was at the time supposedly in the works, the filming location of New Zealand, the Maori designs that apparently influenced the style of Xena's armor, my recent binge-watching of traditional haka performances, and the original series' unfortunate propensity for casting Maori actors more frequently as villains than as heroes, the reboot was an opportunity to feature a Maori actress as the new Xena. Of course, every actor deserves the opportunity to play an original character and make him or her iconic in their own right, rather than simply retreading the past. But there's no reason for these options to be framed as an either-or. Yes, the industry should focus on original properties and on casting the best actor for properties without bias. But simultaneously, in rebooting a popular franchise, why confine the search for a new lead to actors who happen to resemble the original, unless context specifically calls for it? I didn't expect or get many responses to my post, but the ones I did receive were enthusiastic in informing me that a Maori actress in the show's ancient Greek setting would be unrealistic. In Xena, the series that traveled from Zhou Dynasty China to Roman-occupied Britain in about a year and covered events from the Trojan War to Arthurian legend to the Bible. The series where Kevin Smith, who played Ares, was of mixed European and Tongan descent. Where Helen of Troy, the most beautiful woman in the world, was played by Galen Gorge. Where Cleopatra was Gina Torres. Manu Bennett took a turn as Mark Antony. Tony Todd played Cecrops the Lost Mariner. Tamati Rice was both a pseudo-Vercingetorix of Gaul and the literal archangel Raphael. And the man introduced in the first season as Xena's former one true love, before Gabrielle was properly a thing, was played by African-American actor Bobby Hosea. Greek or Mediterranean descent has never been a requisite for actors on the show. Why would it be? Historical accuracy is not friends with Xena Warrior Princess and never has been.
What is it? I don't have a name for it.
If it were, a New Zealander of Irish ancestry wouldn't have been cast as a Bulgarian warrior in Greece to begin with. For reference, the distance from Ireland to Greece is about equal to that between Greece and Sudan.
And when I found out that Daniel Craig no longer wanted to be James Bond, I was heartbroken. Until I heard that at the top of the list, the potential replacement was a man by the name Idris Elba.
I felt it in my stomach when I saw the Doctor Who news. It means the world.
There was this Spider-Man thing that happened where people wanted me to play Spider-Man, and then half people were like, that sounds great, oh my God, I'll totally vote for you. And the other half was like, he's black, kill him. Like, it was like...
You take this role as Starbuck.
Yeah.
Now, how much critical backlash did you get initially?
We were booed at Comic-Con the first time. I remember that. That was really fun.
We've done this so many times, I feel.
Yeah.
That I've developed a fable. It's called The Man Who Gets Really Mad About Cheese. Anyway, one day he goes down to the supermarket to get his cheese. They've changed the box. Changed the shape of the box. And he gets real mad about it. He's like, I've been eating this cheese for 40 years.
Is it the same cheese?
It's the same cheese.
Yeah.
He's like, I'd never again. I'm sick. I've been a good what they're doing is it's just the bloody dairy justice warriors out there changing the shape of the cheese. It's a nightmare.
Yeah.
Listen to me, there is one hard and fast rule for casting a series of Xena, and that is that Carl Urban needs to play at least 4 different characters. Somewhat vindicatingly, a couple of years later, Lucy Lawless was asked at Palermo Comic-Con what her thoughts were on the potential reboot, and...
I'd like to see a black Xena. Why not?
Anyway, let's spend a second talking about the way Xena portrayed culture and race. The answer is that it was a pretty mixed bag. It was the 1990s, the show took place mostly in ancient Europe, almost all of the showrunners, producers, writers, and directors were white. As I mentioned, there were numerous people of color employed as actors and stunt workers on the show. As the show filmed in New Zealand, it featured a number of Maori actors specifically, including Jay Lagaya, who would become known for his role in Star Wars Episodes 2 and 3, in a featuring role as Draco, who was given more three-dimensionality than the usual Warlord of the Week. Also present was Lawrence McQuarrie, who rode to international renown playing numerous villains in The Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit. But especially in earlier seasons, the majority of the people of color on the show were playing one-off villains, doomed warlords, former slaves, and background henchmen, as opposed to any of the main... Oh my god, that's Game of Thrones. I've just described Game of Thrones. I think they did actively try to be progressive sometimes. According to producer Rob Tappert, they thought they were doing groundbreaking work by putting Xena into an interracial relationship in the first season. He later even said that they received protest letters over this depiction.
I would say African American, but American wasn't invented then, but an African love interest, Marcus, played by Bobby Hosea. He's just a fantastic actor and man. And that was all new. That was pretty new stuff to television in the 90s.
So I thought this sounded fake, and I decided to do some research. It sounds absurd today, more than 50 years out from Loving v. Virginia, but until 1997, Gallup polls were still showing a less than 50% approval rating of black and white interracial marriage in America, which, as the child of a multi-ethnic family myself, was fun to learn. It supposedly hovers at around 94% today, which, what the fuck is up with that last 6%, America? This was less than a decade after a 1991 article from the New York Times reported that Tom Smith, director of the General Social Survey at the National Opinion Research Center of the University of Chicago, found 1 in 5 white people surveyed to still believe that interracial marriage should be illegal. So, I mean... Going back to Xena's love interest Marcus, this may have been unusual at the time and the actor did a great job with the character. But also he was in like 3 episodes and ended up dead, so hashtag they tried, I guess. On top of this, conversations on cultural appropriation and whitewashing hadn't entirely hit the mainstream yet, so there were a few, let's say, costume and makeup choices that don't entirely hold up today. Like, what is this? What's going on here, guys? One of the hallmarks of the show is also in the characters' travels to faraway places. Britain, Scandinavia. Some of these depictions created mass controversy at the time, and we will definitely talk about that. But one major fan favorite is the character of Lao Ma, who appears in Season 3's 2-episode flashback arc, The Debt 1 and 2, both of which are set in China and the Mongolian steppe during Xena's reign of terror.
You owe someone so much that you would just throw away these last few years. Yes.
Portrayed with strength, complexity, and grace by Korean-American actress Jacqueline Kim, Lao Ma was instrumental to the plotline of two of the best Xena episodes ever made, a major figure in the younger Xena's life.
You've been a dead woman for a long time now, Xena. I'm offering you the chance to live.
A scholar and a leader and a warrior and a teacher, she was one of the only people to actively treat the young warlord with kindness and compassion and mercy.
Come with me if you wish for freedom.
These episodes aired in late 1997, and at the time, a lot of people took her character to be incredibly positive representation for Asian women on screen. In retrospect, things were a little more complicated.
She's a little martyrish, which, I'm constantly seeking for Asian American characters to be less than ideal.
For one thing, Jacqueline Kim, who portrayed her, is, as mentioned, not Chinese. For another, from a modern perspective, her status as mentor of the mystic arts wasn't exactly breaking stereotypes. For a third, she didn't survive the series.
My hounds have followed Xena's trail here.
They're probably just hungry.
In a 2019 interview with Sarah Kuhn, Jacqueline Kim discusses how the filming process was, quote, just super fun and awesome, and working with Lucy was so liberating because she is game for everything and super professional and funny and smart. She also, quote, loved that they weren't trying to hide that Lao Ma was Asian or say it's uncool to be Asian. She's Xena's mentor. She's the coolest person there.
My lord, I would never hide what is yours.
At the same time, she revealed that the producers had initially wanted her to do an exotic accent, not specific to a region or time period in China, but just generally stereotypically Asian. Other actors on set were even putting on those accents, but she stood her ground, and her version is what went on screen. In a later interview with Michelle Erica Green, she would say, Xena's not speaking in a Greek accent. It's usually asked of somebody who has a different looking face. She was also intent on making sure that the character had complexity. She wrote her own backstory for Lao Ma and would later say, I liked that she was a human being above everything. I think sometimes people can dehumanize Asian women and make them sort of perfect, or they can make them emotionless. Then, on the other end of the spectrum, we have the episode The Way. I haven't rewatched these episodes in a very long while now, and we don't have time to unpack the full mess, so I'm just going to lay out the abridged facts. In season 4, the show had a series of episodes set in India. The final episode of this arc, entitled The Way, also featured several Hindu gods: Krishna, Hanuman, Kali, and Indrajit. There was also a white hippie Jesus type named Eli who preaches peace and nonviolence. Amidst the conflict of the episode, Indrajit captures Gabrielle and Eli, defeats Xena. Xena turns into the goddess Kali and teams up with Krishna to defeat Indrajit and saves Gabrielle. The god Hanuman is also there. They allegedly did consult with Dr. Ravi Pallad of Auckland University, but there were, to my knowledge, no writers, directors, or producers of South Asian descent involved in the production of the episode, which opened on a smorgasbord of Indian cliches and featured the characters wearing these costumes. It was a choice. Anyway, word got out about the themes of the episode and really riled up one particular white New Zealander who some have later suggested had a literal brain tumor at the time. He repeatedly wrote to the studio in protest and also contacted a number of Hindu organizations in the United States, leading to wider outcry by the World Vaishnava Organization and the American Hindus Against Defamation. On February 23, 1999, the production staff received a letter from Sudas Krishnadas, the press secretary of the World Vaishnava Organization, in protest of the episode, which still had not yet screened. It is a very long letter, but I will pick out certain sentiments. To treat Krishna as a fictional character who can be manipulated by scriptwriters for the sole purpose of creating an interesting plot, even if Krishna is portrayed in a good or favorable role, it is still of great concern because it gives a distinct impression that he is fictional. The letter protests that Xena attacks Hanuman, that Hanuman doesn't counterattack, that Xena doesn't apologize, that Hanuman is respectful but receives no respect in return, that Hanuman is not properly respectful to Krishna, that Xena speaks condescendingly to Krishna. Also that Hanuman offers false instruction on how devotees are able to call on Krishna's attention, etc. Quote, if we consider this scene carefully, we see through the eyes of the Xena staff the Vedic scriptures are not only fictional, but they are also untruthful. It is shown by Xena that Krishna is at the beck and call of the proud and faithless. He also protests that the show has replaced real religious icons with fictional characters and states that Xena turning into Kali is deeply offensive to the demigods. He then says that Americans clearly think Kali is like the Hulk, which is pretty funny if you think about it. Like, that's actually kind of a read. In April, the producers, who said that they, quote, produced this episode to illustrate the beauty and power of the Hindu religion, met with Sunil Aghi, founder of the Indo-Americans Political Foundation and a democratic activist in the United States. We should not be seen like the people who protested against Salman Rushdie, Aghi said at the time, and counseled them to remove certain specific scenes from the coming broadcast. Lucy Lawless and Renee O'Connor also taped a 30-second public service announcement with Aghi to air alongside the episode The Way. Afterward, an article from June 1999 on Hinduism Today stated that Hanuman is not harmed by Xena. In fact, they strike up a close friendship. Lord Krishna is depicted in a loving, godly manner. The same online paper's staff allegedly enjoyed the episode, and their New York correspondent, Lavina Melwani, even said, "My husband and I enjoyed the show. It brought Hindu ideas into the mainstream, reaching an audience that would not be exposed otherwise." But still, the furor in the US and in India grew. Some said that the show should have consulted with religious people instead of with Aghi, who represented a more secular organization. There was ongoing outcry from the American Hindus Against Defamation, the World Vaishnava Organization, the Hindu Students' Council, the Vishwa Hindu Parishad. There were petitions with thousands of signatures. There were floods of hate mail. There were pickets outside of Universal. The episode was pulled from re-release, and there were official apologies from the studio. Then some Xena fans started a counter-campaign called Xenites Against Censorship, pointing to the show's usual disrespectful treatment of the Greek gods. Although this comparison obviously ignores the fact that worship of the ancient Greek pantheon was not a living religion, unlike Hinduism. The episode was eventually re-released several months later, with one specific clip of Xena headbutting Hanuman removed, but it still drew protests on the basis that these figures should not be depicted on television for entertainment regardless. Also, in a 2021 YouTube comment on a video by That Movie Chick entitled "That Time Xena Went to India and Almost Got Cancelled," Rajneel Singh, the actor who played Indrajit, wrote an open letter on behalf of himself and fellow actor Rajiv Varma, who played Krishna. Both of them, he says, were practicing Hindus at the time. The comment outlines that it being 1990s New Zealand, most of the actors were thrilled just to have featured roles in Xena, as the show rarely portrayed Indian or Asian characters, that as practicing Hindus they thought, quote, the production was pretty fantastic and largely accurate, that it was surprisingly on target and not offensive, and that, quote, the complaints were started by a very strange white hippie dude, and nearly all of the organizations who opposed the show and protested it were considered to be ultra-conservative and far to the right Hindu organizations. He concludes that as a person of color working in the film industry, quote, I have nothing but thanks for Rob Tappert and Lucy for pushing hard to find ways to make their show diverse and get diverse stories into it in the 1990s when there was zero precedent for it. So that's a lot. I don't know how to conclude all of this other than to say, in the future, be careful when portraying world cultures and living religions when you have zero producers, writers, or regular cast members of that culture or religion. And if a reboot of Xena does ever go ahead, this is one of the ways in which they now have a chance to do better. A fair, respectful, three-dimensional, and nuanced portrayal of a culture and its people.
No, I'm sorry that we killed Xena. It seemed like a good idea at the time. It was a terrible idea.
As with any long-running series, there is a lot of fan debate about what constitutes the best years of the show. For a while, both the actors and the writers flourished more and more with each year, as did the budget. Season 3 is often considered to be something of a golden age. Producer Liz Friedman, writer Steven Sears, and writer-producer RJ Stewart all left the team for a time after Season 4, and their presence and influence was inarguably missed. It was the time of a lot of turmoil behind the scenes. scores of crew members left to work on Lord of the Rings, which was fully monopolizing New Zealand's filmmaking industry at the time. Executives were focusing their energy on other projects. Lucy Lawless was pregnant with her second child. The new writers were brought in who seemed, at least from the outside, to be somewhat in over their heads. A time skip also left behind some fan favorite supporting characters. The subtext was diminished for a while, replaced by a sudden refocusing on random male love interests, and the ratings, coincidentally I'm sure, plummeted. Season 6 was considered something of a return to form, and it continued to have excellent one-off episodes, but by this time the writing was on the wall, leading to a massive 2-part series finale entitled A Friend in Need. So we don't talk about A Friend in Need. It was certainly crafted with a lot of careful effort and attention by the cast and crew, and some of the creators and some fans still hold it near and dear to their hearts, but to many of us, we have collectively decided to view it as non-canonical. Xena broke 1,000 barriers and buried 100 stereotypes. No one likes to think of it betraying its legacy of feminine power and queer love by falling into the trope of permanently burying its bisexual lead. The finale aired in 2001 when discussions of that trope were only just beginning to hit the mainstream, and undoubtedly the cast and crew thought they were crafting a fitting end for a Greek warrior who was always searching for redemption. Lucy Lawless has since changed her view on the show's ending, discussing it in multiple interviews and telling Entertainment Weekly that it was a, quote, huge regret, saying, "We didn't realize, really, what it meant to people. We thought, oh, that's a really strong ending. Now I just say to fans, let's pretend it never happened."
From now on, you're going to get increasingly older people saying to you, "Hey guys, I used to watch you when I was a kid," and you're going to want to kick them, but don't kick them.
So where is Xena today, more than 20 years down the line since the series finale?
It was very ahead of its time. Maybe that's why it's still relevant, because the times are sort of catching up to it.
Ooh, that's interesting.
Do you like that? Like that?
I'm going to take that to the bank. That's good.
Our modern slate of sci-fi, fantasy, and action projects would simply not be what it is today without the groundbreaking work of the cast and crew in 1995.
It was the first time that a show of that production value had really been shot in New Zealand. And it really upskilled everybody, not only just actors, but also the crew. And in actual fact, many of the crew were then cherry-picked by Peter Jackson, and they went on to work on Lord of the Rings.
A lot of people have a lot of attitudes about a lot of things until those things become successful, and then they change their attitudes. I know that in the early days of Hercules and Xena both, people tended to have a bit of a haughty attitude about them. And then they found out that people were watching them and liking them, and then all of a sudden you saw a lot of knockoffs of these shows. You saw a lot of shows that tried to be these shows and weren't.
We're not averse to ripping anybody else off, so we're not averse to other people ripping us off. And I mean, obviously Buffy and Dark Angel are great examples of that, and then there's the Xenas and the goodness knows what else. But yeah, I'm very happy to be part of that continuum.
Without Xena's success, without the efforts of its creatives, there would have been no Buffy, there may have been no Dark Angel, there certainly wouldn't have been a Cleopatra 2525, or perhaps an Alias, or a La Femme Nikita, all of which were stepping stones for Gina Torres before she landed Firefly.
Her iconic role as Xena, the warrior princess, altered the concept of what it meant to be a kick-ass woman back in the 1990s, and she hasn't stopped since.
We might not have had Kill Bill as we know it, and just as there is no warrior princess without Terminator, and no Terminator without Alien, literally every action heroine we've seen since has found her path just a little bit smoother because of Xena.
I had to fight very hard with the head of Universal at the time, Sid Sheinberg, who said, "Hey, I did Bionic Woman, I did Cagney and Lacey. They didn't work, really. And they were successful, but they had no value, residual value." He says, "I don't think they'll work." He says, "I just don't think people will show up to watch them." Well, Xena is second that worked. Then they got Buffy, and it really led to a whole retooling of girl power. And it came because there was nothing like that before.
Growing up, watching Xena, the warrior princess, today's Women of Impact was so riveted by seeing this strong female character on weekly television. But what she didn't realise was that one day, young girls all around the world would too be watching her play an iconic badass role on TV.
And let's be honest, it's half responsible for a lot of design elements that are now ingrained into the public consciousness.
At base, we've got Xena, Jackie Chan, and Robin Hood.
I was about to go into playing Xena, and Rob hooked me up with his friend Bruce. And I was like, why is he sending me on a hike with this guy? I don't know. Who's this clown anyway? Bruce taught me about, everybody else is earning less than you. Don't you ever complain. Don't, you're the morale leader on set. Anyway, except now he's a crusty old bastard. He's forgotten all the rules. And I'm there to every time he's like, I'm up at 4 a.m. I'm like, oh, poor you, Bruce, poor you.
Having the opportunity to work with Lucy Lawless and to see how a number one drives the ship was an invaluable, inspirational experience. She's got her eye on the clock and she's like, all right, come on, lots to do. And she's just sort of gently getting everybody to, when the crew gets tired, to sort of focus and sort of drive forward. And I still think of her even today when I'm shooting the boys and the example that she set. She's an amazing woman.
Lucy, without a doubt, has been such an informative role model, really. I knew when I watched her, that's the kind of person I wanted to be on set. She was the lead. She took her work seriously, but she always set this sort of tone that was lighthearted. She was super accessible, was really impressed by how she conducted herself. Lucy had said, you and I are often the nucleus of the mood on set, and it's important that you accept and respect that responsibility.
Who is the one character or superhero part that you would love to play, regardless of gender? Who's that? Is there one out there?
I want to be Lucy Lawless.
Me too.
I want to be Lucy Lawless.
That's her little joke.
But arguably nowhere was the impact stronger than on Xena's audience. While it was on, fans claimed that the show was empowering them to leave abusive relationships. For others, even for personal friends of mine, it was part of their first wake-up call that they were not heterosexual.
So when I was stuck with this label of being a feminist icon, I was very taken aback at first and wanted nothing to do with it. I felt like I was being politicized, oh, they're politicizing me. So if people take something good from it and do something, they'll say, oh, I really took a lot of courage and it helped me get out of an abusive relationship, or it helped me come out to my parents, or it helped me get off drugs and become a teacher, whatever the thing is. It was like, well, you did that. I don't take any credit for it, and I don't take any blame for, anything. It's like, you did that.
Some fans wrote their master's thesis about Xena. For me personally, it spawned a lifelong fascination with ancient history and travel to foreign places. Yes, this is a costume that my mother made when I was 9 years old, which I revamped a decade later for Comic-Con. So what else has happened in the years since Xena went off the air? Renee O'Connor started her own production company. Condoleezza Rice was unfortunately nicknamed the Warrior Princess by members of her staff, which mostly makes sense if you're talking about the war crimes. Kevin Todd Smith passed away following an accident on a film set in China in 2002. He is still very much missed. In 2005, the scientific team that discovered the dwarf planet 2003UB313 nicknamed it Xena. Later the same year, the team found that 2003UB313 had a moon, which they of course nicknamed Gabrielle. In 2006, Lucy Lawless was actually present at the deathbed of a longtime Xena fan, was there with her family, her friends, and her partner, remembering the revolutionary life that the woman had lived. Lawless was also arrested at an oil drilling protest in 2012 and continues to be an advocate for climate consciousness. She remains outspoken online and occasionally just absolutely bodies Kevin Sorbo when he's being an asshole on Twitter. In 2013, Jennifer Skye, the actor for A-MUSE-D, wrote an op-ed in the New York Times to discuss how liberating Xena had been for her. After an abusive teenage modeling career that resulted in post-traumatic stress disorder, her time on the show learning horseback riding, archery, and numerous fighting techniques had been, quote, shout it to the heavens inspiring. The last Xena convention was held in 2015, but over the years, Xena fans have raised millions of dollars for charity in total. The first Wonder Woman movie came out in 2017, and Lucy Lawless wasn't in it, which is fine. I definitely feel fine and normal about that. Rumors of attempted reboots of the show have since come and gone. I would love to see the original cast back, following in Linda Hamilton's footsteps for Terminator Dark Fate, and watch them walk happily into the sunset ever after, passing the baton down to a new generation. Whatever path they take, I hope they're conscious of who they put on screen, and also have behind the camera and in the writer's room. It's not Xena if it's not pushing boundaries.
Rob, like I say, will look where the frontiers are of acceptability in television and start pushing back those. That's what makes it groundbreaking television.
It's not Xena if it's not progressive, and they now have the opportunity to do so much better than they were able to in the 90s. Moving down the list, Renee O'Connor started her own nonprofit theater company in 2019. In 2021, tennis legend Serena Williams released the Xena line of her personal sportswear brand. The website states that the clothing is made for your inner warrior princess. The same year, Lucy Lawless and Renee O'Connor finally reunited on screen in Lawless's show My Life is Murder. And in 2022, a literal statue of Xena would have a cheeky blink and you miss it cameo in Sam Raimi's Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness. To quote producer Richie Palmer, "The great Lucy Lawless. This scene pays tribute to female heroes and villains. She's the embodiment of both. Nature is healing." Also, in the 1950s and 60s in Italy, the industry was briefly dominated by what came to be known as sword and sandal or peplum films, which were low-budget historical or mythological epics in the vein of Hollywood blockbusters like Cleopatra, Ben-Hur, and Spartacus, and included Steve Reeves in what is still one of the most iconic portrayals of Hercules in 1958, the same year in which American author Daniel P. Mannix coincidentally published Those About to Die, an in-depth historical fiction account of the lives of the Roman gladiators, before enthusiasm for this genre ultimately faded away. In 1972, future Hollywood scriptwriter David Franzoni dropped out of grad school to motorbike across Europe and was inspired by the many ruins of ancient arenas that he saw on his tour, a journey that stayed with him for over 20 years. Meanwhile, fantasy and historical epics were persona non grata at the box office. Aside from a brief sword and sandal revival in the 1980s, which included Arnold Schwarzenegger's Conan the Barbarian, a character Schwarzenegger was later uninterested in returning to, so the script for the follow-up Conan the Conqueror was changed to Kull the Conqueror in 1997, and the part was given to Kevin Sorbo, who was at that time starring in Hercules: The Legendary Journeys, the parent show of Xena Warrior Princess, where the titular character would often be seen battling Rome both in the arena and outside of it. At the same period in the late 90s, the previous Euro tripper David Franzoni approached Hollywood producer Douglas Wick and suggested a film set in the Roman Colosseum, for which he then worked up a draft based on Mannix's 1958 book, Those About to Die, and the idea was sold to DreamWorks, with Ridley Scott coming on to direct as principal photography began in January 1999. That film, released in the year 2000, was obviously Gladiator, which won the Academy Award for Best Picture, and alongside the New Zealand-produced Lord of the Rings trilogy, ushered in a new Hollywood era of historical epics that include Troy, 300, Kingdom of Heaven, Alexander, and of course King Arthur, scripted by David Franzoni himself. The screenwriter for Troy would later go on to work on a new series that was greenlit for HBO in 2008 entitled Game of Thrones, which would then become one of the biggest television shows of the decade after its premiere in 2010. The same year as the television series Spartacus premiered, which was created by Sam Raimi and executive produced by Rob Tapert and appeared on Starz co-starring Lucy Lawless. I'm not saying that Xena is the reason we have Gladiator. I'm just saying that it was a part of the cultural zeitgeist at the time, and it's important for us to pay respect to every complex thread that has led us to where we are in pop culture and art today.